Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is story about what if Naruto x Kronos Percy Jackson part 1. Before I start, please do support for more amazing content and comments for part 2. Do consider to subscribe my channel and share my video to your friends and check out the description as well. Let's start the video. Come on Annabeth. We need to keep moving. Talia Grace yelled out as she ran with a small girl next to her through a dark forest. I'm trying, Talia, she cried out as she followed the older girl. Behind the two of them, a young boy came up on them and ran beside them. I bought us some time, but we need to keep moving, he yelled as the three kept running. Talia spared a glance over at the boy before looking behind them when whatever was chasing them roared out in anger. The punk girl cursed under her breath before stopping, a spear appearing in her hand. Shut up, she roared out as lightning struck her spear and shot out towards the beast. She didn't stick around to see if she hit or not as she turned to catch up with her friends, but the loud, pain-filled roar clued her in that she hit whatever it was. Annabeth looked at the tall boy running with them with a worried look on her face. Luke. What is that? She asked the blond boy. Luke glanced behind them and shook his head. Hellhound, a big hellhound, he breathed out as he kept running. Talia caught up with the two just as Annabeth tumbled to the ground. Ah! She cried out as she fell to the ground. She hissed in pain as she felt a jolt go up her leg. Talia looked to the small blonde girl and stopped and crouched next to her. You okay, Annie? She asked the girl. Annabeth whimpered out in pain and shook her head. Luke looked behind them and noticed the pissed-off hellhound was gaining on them. Gods, we need to move now, he called to the two. Talia looked to the boy and back to Annabeth. Luke, help me carry Annabeth, she said as she slung one of the girl's arms over her shoulder. Luke nodded and got under her other arm and began to take off with Talia. We can't get very far like this, Annabeth cried out. We need to find somewhere to hide, she said to the two, earning nods from both teens. As the girl said that, a small opening in the trees caught their eyes. Talia didn't know why, but the trail that went down that opening seemed to call out to her. Luke, that way, she said as she began to turn. All right, he said as he turned with her, and the two carried their friend down the path. About 50 meters down the path they came across a small cabin. A soft light came from the windows of the home and a welcoming air overtook the three. In there Annabeth breathed out, gaining nods from her friends. The three made their way to the front door of the cabin. Talia made to knock on the door, but before she could, the door opened. Behind the door was a tall man that seemed to be in his mid to late 20s. He had spiked blonde hair and blue eyes that almost seemed to pierce through her soul. But what really caught the three's attention was the 3 whisker marks on each of his cheeks. The man smiled at the three and opened his door fully. Oh, visitors. It's been a while since I've had anyone to entertain. Well, don't be shy, little ones. Come in, he said as he stepped out of the doorway, making room for them to enter. Talia looked to Luke, getting a hesitant nod of approval before they went in. They walked into the house and noticed that it seemed rather homey. There was a large fireplace in the center of the cabin with 2 chairs and a couch surrounding it. There was a small kitchen off to the side and a bed on the other side of the cabin. There was a door in the back of the main room that must have been the bathroom. What was odd about the house was that along one of the walls was what seemed to be a weapons rack filled with strange-looking knives, single-edged blades and ninja-throwing stars. The strangest of the weapons had to be the oddly shaped 3-pronged knife in a glass case display. Talia looked around before helping Luke set Annabeth down on the couch. The punk girl looked over to their host with a curious gaze. She was about to say something but the blonde man quickly cut her off. Oof. Wow, that looks bad. Here, let me take a look-see, he said as he shuffled over to Annabeth and took a glance at her ankle. After a second he scratched his chin and hummed lightly. Yup, you definitely have a sprain here, little miss. Here, just give me a sec. Before he brought his hands up and hovered them over her ankle. Now I haven't done this in a long while, so bear with me here, he said before he let out a long breath. After a long second, a green hue began shining from his hands that steadily increased in brightness and size, until it covered the girl's ankle. Annabeth could instantly feel the pain in her ankle fade as she let out a sigh of relief. Talia and Luke looked at their blonde host in awe as the swelling in the young girl's ankle instantly went down and lost its dark purple coloring from bruising. How are you doing that? Talia asked the blonde with a look of awe. Their host looked over at her with a raised eyebrow before his brow furrowed. It's just medical wait, sorry, wrong era for you to even begin to know what that is. Sorry, but I don't know technicalities of what I'm doing. Sorta forgot, sorta never quite understood all the minute details of it to begin with. Like I said, it's been a while, he said to the girl before his eye furrowed. Oh yeah, what are your names, by the way? He asked the group. Thaya narrowed her eyes at the man before crossing her arms. This guy was weird, And she didn't like it. He made her feel, oddly, both comforted and incredibly intimidated at the same time. But before she could tell him off, the little girl he was tending to spoke up. "I am Annabeth Chase," she said to the man. The blond man turned his head back to his patient and smiled warmly at her, his eyes closing and his whisker marks stretching slightly, giving him a fox-like look. "It's nice to meet you, little one. Oh, and by the way, you should stay off your ankle as much as possible for about a day or two, so as not to aggravate it and cause it to swell up again," he instructed her, waiting until he received a nod from the blonde girl. The other blonde of their group stepped forward with an offered hand. "I'm Luke Castellan," he said with his suave smirk. Their host narrowed his eyes at the boy slightly, but shrugged and took the offered hand. "It is nice to meet you, Luke," he said politely, though with a subtle edge to his voice. Talia sighed lowly, and shook her head before stepping forward. "And I'm Talia Grace." "And you are?" she asked rudely, understandably not trusting the man. She didn't know what it was, but their host just seemed off. Like there was more to him, much more to him, almost a sinister aspect to him. Their blonde host looked at the girl for a moment before tilting his head to the side in confusion. "You know, that is a good question. It's on the tip of my tongue. Darn, I fear I've forgotten my name again, young miss. I do apologize," he said as he scratched his whiskered cheek with a nervous chuckle. "How could you forget your own name?" Annabeth cried out in confusion. The blonde host turned towards the girl before ruffling her hair with his right hand, that Talia took notice that it was covered in white bandages. "I don't know, young one. I guess after a while with no one saying it, it just sort of slipped my mind," he said as a sad look crossed his face. He sat quietly for a second, looking off into space for a moment before his eyes lit up like he remembered something. "In fact, I think you are my first guest since that young mother and her baby came here. Rhea? Raina? I can't quite remember her name. It was a long time ago, though," he mused while he tapped a finger against his chin. "They stayed here for about 20 years? Yeah, I think that's it. Little Zeke and his lightning powers. At least I think his name was Zeke. Could have been Zook Sack? Whatever. I helped raise that little tyke and showed him how to bend the wind and lightning to his will." As he continued to ramble on, Talia, Luke, and Annabeth shared a look between each other. This guy was crazy. Their host got up from his spot next to Annabeth and started to pace around the cabin as he talked about a mother and child coming to his cabin, hiding from the father because of an abusive relationship. Talia leaned over to Luke. "What should we do?" she whispered to him in concern about being in the same place as a lunatic for too long. Luke thought for a moment before responding. "So far he hasn't acted hostile. In fact, I think he just likes having someone to talk to. I say we stay until morning and then leave as soon as we are ready in the morning." Talia nodded to her friend and went back to whatever story their host was telling. "Oh, but before those two, I had a visitor. She was the first to visit since that old man made this cabin for me. Little Pebble was cute back then. Now she's all grown up, I think. Haven't gotten to talk to her since she left to be back with her husband." He mused again. Now he was in the kitchen making something. "I hope you guys like ramen. It's literally the only thing I remember how to make without burning," he said as he set 3 large bowls on the small table in his kitchen. He picked up a 4th bowl and walked over to Annabeth and handed it to her. "Careful, dear, it's very hot," he said as he also handed her a towel and a pair of chopsticks and a spoon. Thank you," Annabeth said quietly as she looked at the bowl of noodles in her lap. The man smiled broadly and walked back to the kitchen table and took a seat in front of one of the other bowls. Just before he began to dig in, he looked back to Talia and Luke with a raised eyebrow. "Well, come on? It'll get cold if you let it sit for too long," he said as he raised his chopsticks and clasped his hands together. "Itadakimasu," the man cried out before diving into his food. Talia and Luke watched as their host inhaled his food like he hadn't eaten in years. After what seemed like a single second, the blond man was draining the broth from his food and set his bowl down with a blissful sigh. "Man, how dull the centuries have been without the taste of ramen," he said with closed eyes and an airy smile. He cracked a single eye open to look at the 2 children sharing his table. "Well, come on, children, dig in," he urged the 2. Talia looked to Luke before turning back to the bowl of broth-covered noodles. She let out a low sigh before bringing some of the boiled dough up and taking her first bite. And then a second bite. And then she and Luke jumped into the bowls with gusto. "By the gods, this is good," Annabeth called out from the couch as she finished her bowl. Talia and Luke readily nodded in agreement as they drained their bowls and set them down with shocked looks on their faces. Their host sported a grin so large that it forced his eyes to close, giving him a fox-like expression. "I've still got it, it seems," he exclaimed with a wide smirk. "Can't believe I cooked it right after not serving it in about 5,000 years." He mused as he stood from his seat and went to the hearth. However, He didn't take notice, or if he did, he very obviously didn't care to the fact that both Talia and Luke began to choke and flail around, spinning to stare at their host. Did you? Talia began to sputter out before Annabeth finished for her. 5,000 years. She cried as she looked at the man in shocked confusion. Taking a seat and poking at the flames, their blonde host froze as his face went blank. He seemed to just sit there for what seemed like hours to the three children. He was dead to the world until Talia walked up and snapped her fingers in front of his face, making the blonde shake his head and look at her. "Sorry, did I zone out on you?" he asked with sheepish grin. Talia gave him a deadpan look and nodded her head. He chuckled slightly and scratched the back of his head. "Well, sorry about that. Why don't you kids get some rest? You all must be exhausted from all that running," he said as he stood from the hearth and moved towards the couch where Annabeth was lying. As he took the bowl from the little girl's hands, he draped a soft blanket over her. Where he got it, no one knew. Talia was about to start up her interrogation of the man when she felt something come over her. Her eyelids grew heavy and her legs grew weak. Annabeth let out a long yawn before curling up on the couch, falling asleep quickly. Luke quickly got up from the table, only to fall to a knee, his eyes struggling to stay open. Before he could get back up, he finally succumbed to whatever was taking over, and fell to the ground asleep. Talia watched as the blonde man walked over to her friend. She tried to get up and stop him, but her body was too heavy to move on her own. "And no, stop," she ground out as she struggled to stay awake. She watched the man pick up her friend and lay him next to the hearth, wrapped in a blanket, and resting on a pillow. The host looked over her with a soft smile and walked over to her. "Don't worry, little one. Just rest, and learn from your dreams," he said before pressing his index and middle finger to her forehead in a quick press. "All will make sense soon," she heard him say as her eyes grew too heavy to remain open, and finally fell into Morpheus' realm. An unfamiliar city laid at rest for the night. The moon rose up high, the citizens resting peacefully. But all was not well. Some distance from the city, a new life was being born. There was a man and woman, in a small cave away from the city. The woman had finally finished going through labor, and her husband was smiling at her, congratulating her. But before either parent could hold their child, a masked man appeared and took the child. The father saved the newborn boy, but at the sacrifice of his wife. The father brought his son to a safe place before going to face the masked man again. But now, the masked man had a weapon of unparalleled power on his side. It was as big as a mountain, and its 9 swaying tails flicked out and crushed the city below it. The husband defeated the masked man, but before he could kill the man, he vanished. Now the husband needed to deal with the dreaded monster attacking his home. He led the beast from his home, and brought it to his son. With tear-filled eyes, he brought out a demon, a monster that was known as the Shinigami, to seal the beast away. At the sacrifice of his own soul, he sealed the monster away into his newborn son. And so, the boy's first hour in the world left him alone, and crying out for the ones who loved him. It was day now, and people were walking through the streets of the unknown city. A young boy, clad in orange, ran through the streets and over the rooftops. A megawatt grin across his face as he laughed and ran from his pressures. He had paint cans in his hands, and the grand monument that sat on the peak of the mountain overlooking the city had a fresh coat of graffiti on it. The boy was eventually caught and brought back to his school. At the end of the day, he walked through the streets with his eyes downcast. The faint whispers all around him, the heated glares and the muffled curses all pointed at the lonely boy. The boy, however, just raised his head and glared back at them. He raised his fist and vowed. He poured his heart into his vow and his eyes filled with determination. "I swear I'll be Hokage one day. Then, you all will have to respect me and treat me as a somebody." The boy trained, he fought, and he grew. Soon, he was a young adult, standing before a ruined plain of land. That land was in fact the city he had known for so long. The boy had fought many battles. He had defeated a demon with his own 2 hands, battled the Lord of Snakes, fought with his traitorous friend, and even killed an immortal. But no one had been able to fight him on this level. He was beaten and battered. The man of 6 was down to 1 as he stood over him, the eyes of God staring into his soul as he prepared to finish the battle. But before he could, a young woman appeared and stopped the man. She fought as well as she could, but was struck down by the man. She stared at the boy and smiled at him, telling him all will be all right, that she looked up to him, that he inspired her to keep fighting, that she had fallen in love with him. And it was then, the man struck her down. And it was then that the boy fell into despair. The monster that once attacked his home, he nearly let loose again as he attacked the man. But he found his balance, he stopped his rampage, and finally, resealed the monster and defeated the man. He brought them all back. All those he had lost to the man of 6, they all walked again. He was hailed as a hero, his dream finally realized. He was looked at more than just a monster. He was the hero to the people, and loved by all. But his hardships weren't over. The masked man returned, and war was brewing. The boy rallied the world together to face this foe. The armies of men fought side by side against an army of the undead and false men. They fought through the day and night, and finally, men gained the upper hand in the battle. All before the masked man played his ace. A monster, every larger than the beast the boy had sealed away. Its 10 tails changing the terrain and causing storm. Hundreds of men lost. Thousands more changed forever. But the boy stayed. He fought alongside his friends, his family, and even the beast within him, and finally, he struck down the beast. Only for the monster's creator to arrive and attack the boy and his friends. They fought through lands of ice, fire, and a land that which none could stand. The masked man changed his ways and fought alongside the boy, and he died for the boy. In a rage, the boy fought the goddess. He and his friends fought her and defeated her, but not before she cursed the boy. You insolent whelp! I curse you! I curse you to unending life! May you watch your precious world fall around you! May you walk through time knowing only solitude and despair! Walk alone through time, little boy! Walk alone for all eternity! With this I curse you! Uzumaki Naruto! Annabeth's eyes snapped open as she let out a startled scream. She was covered in a light coat of sweat, and her breath was ragged. The 7-year-old girl was shaking as she looked around the dark cabin, lit only by the dying embers of the hearth fire. She saw Luke laying in a blanket next to the hearth, sleeping peacefully and breathing with a steady pace, like he hadn't been bothered at all by her scream, almost like he hadn't even heard her. The blonde girl looked around some more before she noticed Talia curled up in one of the armchairs, snoring softly and mumbling in her sleep. The young girl tried to stand up, but a jolt of pain in her ankle made her whimper and fall back into the couch. She began to panic, until she noticed something pressed into the couch next to her. She looked to her right and noticed a wooden crutch leaning against the cushion next to her, made to perfectly fit her height. And where it came from, she had no idea. She reached a tentative hand out for the crutch and stood slowly, trying to keep as much weight off her bad ankle as possible. She started to make her way through the dimly lit cabin and found the door to the porch. After she opened the door, she walked outside and was met with the cool night air and a gentle breeze. She looked around as she listened to the sounds of the woods around them. The sounds of crickets chirping and toads croaking. She looked around and was struggling to keep her mouth from hanging open from the beauty of the clearing in which the cabin lay. Wildflowers lined the building and spread out around the flat land. Lightning bugs twinkled in the night and flew freely through the air. She looked until she found a lone stump of what she thought would be a once great tree. It had to be nearly 10 feet in diameter, and at the center of the cut tree sat their host, and she nearly gasped as she figured out what the horrible dream she had was about, or should she say, who it was about. The cursed boy sat before her. His once wild and spiked blonde hair, cut down and finally tamed. His once explosive and shining eyes dimmed and shut. His tan skin turned pale. Even his ever-present whisker marks were faded and less prominent than the boy of the dream. He sat there with his legs crossed and his hands folded in his lap, in the shape of some strange hand sign. Altogether, he had an ancient aura that surrounded him, and made him seem far older than he visibly was. Keeping his eyes closed, he let out a small sigh before beckoning for her to join him. Annabeth crawled onto the stump and shuffled to sit in front of him. She looked at him with expectant eyes as he remained motionless. After a pregnant pause, he finally spoke. "So, what have you learned from your dreams?" he asked in a quiet tone, almost like he didn't want to disturb the slightly unnervingly quiet night. Annabeth tilted her head to the side as she thought of a way to summarize what she had seen. But before she said anything, she took a closer look at his face. Over his eyelids was a reddish-orange tint that hadn't been there seconds ago, but she chose to ignore the change and continued to speak. "I know your name," she started to say before he held up his hand to silence her. "I'm sorry," he began. "But names hold great power, little one, and neither I nor the rest of the world is ready for my name to be spoken again quite yet, but for now you may call me Kurama," he said as he opened his eyes and revealed that his once blue eyes had turned a deep amber that almost seemed to glow in the night, along with a cross-like design instead of a pupil. Annabeth slowly nodded, trying not to stare at his eyes. "Yeah, okay, Kurama," she slowly said with a nod. "Well, to answer your question, I guess I saw your life?" she said, not quite sure what he wanted to hear. Kurama nodded slowly before he gave her a small smile. True that you did. But did you actually learn anything from viewing my past? Any valuable lessons to be known, any truths that have been revealed?" he asked the girl, getting a confused look from her. She tilted her head to the side trying to think of something. Kurama smirked at her and nudged her a little. Come on, you're a wise one, child. What was the lesson in viewing my past? He asked the girl. She continued to think, but she couldn't find the answer. She shook her head and looked at him sheepishly. I'm sorry, I don't know what I learned, she said before looking at him with a hopeful expression. Can you tell me? She asked him, only for him to shake his head no. I'm sorry, but it is a lesson you must learn yourself, but I can give you some advice. Stay close to your friends, they will make you much stronger than you will ever be alone, he said to her with a smile. Annabeth let a small smile grace her lips as she sat next to Kurama. So she started, her curiosity rising. Where are we exactly? She asked with a pleading look in her eyes, almost like not knowing was going to drive her insane. Kurama chuckled as he patted the girl on the head with a smile. All right, that I can tell you, he said to her before he took a deep breath and let it out slowly. We are in a space created for myself that is completely cut off from the outside world and the domains of the ones you call gods. He began as Annabeth sat up straighter and began to take mental notes. Thousands of years ago, long before the gods existed, and even before the Titans, my people roamed the world. But as you saw in your dream, we were a war-torn people, and eventually we lead ourselves to self-destruction, and that's when they ended their first game. He finished with a slight growl. Game? Annabeth asked in confusion. What game? And who were they? Kurama sighed deeply, but before he could answer her, something caught his eye. A large gray-furred wolf, about the size of a lion, walked into the clearing and slowly made its way over to where the two of them were sitting. As it stood in front of Kurama, it looked at him dead in the eyes before taking a few steps forward. Annabeth looked at the wolf with wide eyes and began to back away from it, but she was stopped by Kurama's voice. My, what brings you here, young one? He asked the wolf as it stepped closer, and closer until it sat on the stump next to the blonde, sniffing him curiously. After a moment, the blonde reached up and began to scratch the large wolf behind its ears, earning a pleasant whimper from the beast as it laid down next to the man. Such a strong being you are, but just a big softa on the inside, aren't ya? He said as he continued to pet the large beast. Soon after the wolf laid down, several other wolves entered the clearing and trotted over to the blonde. Oh? And you brought your family along with you? He said as he watched these wolves enter the clearing and approach him faster than the first had. There were 12 in total as they circled and sat around the blonde, enjoying his presence. Kurama chuckled as he patted one of the wolves next to him on its stomach. He looked off into the tree leaves surrounding them and smiled softly. Well, I have met the pack, but I still need to be introduced to the hunters. Why don't you all come out so that we may talk to one another? He said in a kind tone, scratching a wolf on the stomach as he said so. Annabeth raised an eyebrow at the man before she saw what he was talking to. Several women walked into the clearing, all holding silver bows with their arrows drawn back and aimed at Kurama. Wait, she couldn't really call them women, they were all too young for that. They were girls, none of them any older than Talia. And they made a path for a young girl to walk past them. She looked no older than 12, but she carried herself with a certain confidence that showed maturity and experience. She had shoulder-length auburn hair and startling silver eyes. Her bow was strung across her back along with her quiver, and 2 large sax knives were holstered on her sides. She stood in front of Kurama with a slight scowl on her face. Where is Talia Grace, man? She asked while adding a slight hint of venom to the word man. Kurama didn't let her words provoke him, however, as he just smiled at the girl. My, you are a strong-willed young one. You remind me of a friend I once had several years ago, he said, still petting one of the wolves that had decided to rest its head in his lap. The girl narrowed her eyes at Kurama and crossed her arms. I don't care for your tone, man. Tell me who you are and where Talia Grace is, she demanded. Kurama arched an eyebrow before chuckling. That doesn't seem to be any way to speak to your elders there, miss. But if you are looking for Miss Grace, then she is inside the cabin resting from her journey, he told her while waving his hand towards his cabin. The girl gave him an annoyed look before she started to move towards the cabin, only to be stopped by the man's voice. Though if you are looking for her, I would like to know why. I can't have one of my guests harmed while on my watch, in case that is why you are here, he told her in a serious tone while giving her a hard look. The girl looked at him for a moment before one of her hunters spoke up from the group. How dare you speak to Lady Artemis like that, you pig of a man? One of the girls shouted as she aimed her bow at him and prepared to let an arrow fly. But as the arrow left her weapon, it stopped. It sat in the middle of the air as the man looked right at her with hardened eyes. Soon all of the hunters were restricted by tendrils of wood that sprouted from the ground, wrapping around their ankles and arms, holding them still. Artemis spun on him with her sax knives drawn, only to be restricted in the same way as her hunters. Her eyes widened as she found she couldn't break her restraints with even her godly power, and she could even feel her strength slowly leaving her body. Like the wooden trap was slowly sapping her of power, and lulling her into sleep. Annabeth watched with awestruck eyes as Kurama halted all 20 hunters and their mistress without moving an inch, not even bothering the wolves that sat with him. The hunters struggled in their restraints as Kurama looked at them. This place is a sanctuary for those in need. There will be no violence here that would put those resting here in danger. Now lower your weapons so that we may speak civilly, or I will keep you restrained for the rest of your stay. Kurama warned them as his eyes began to glow with an eerie golden glow. Kurama looked to Artemis and waited for her response. The goddess glared at him for a long moment before she growled and looked to her hunters. Lower your weapons, she growled as she dropped her knives to the ground. Soon after she let go of her weapons, hunters dutifully followed her lead and dropped their weapons. Before their weapons could touch the ground, more tendrils made of wood appeared and confiscated them, keeping them out of reach. You will get those back when you leave, Kurama told them as he released them from their restraints. Now, Artemis, was it? It is time to answer my question. Why have you come, and how did you find this grove? He asked in a no-nonsense tone. The goddess glowered at the man before she huffed in annoyance. My father started to panic when he could no longer see or even sense Talia, so he sent all of the available gods out to find her. And I found this place because I am the goddess of the hunt. There is no prey that can hide from me, even in cut-off realms such as this, she explained while glaring at the man. Now, I will go and collect Talia Grace and be on my way, she said as she turned towards the cabin, only to be stopped when she noticed a thicket of branches blocking the door to the cabin. Sorry, but I cannot let you disturb her dreams at the moment. She is learning a valuable lesson about the world and needs to see it through till the end, he said as he finally stood from his place on the stump and walked towards the back of the cabin. Artemis turned on her heel and glared at him. And what gives you the authority to tell me what I can and cannot do? You are just a mortal man, what power do you have over the gods? She asked in annoyed rage. Kurama looked at her for a moment before ignoring her question and walking away. One of them has woken up, please remain here until I return, he said as he disappeared from sight. A small boy sat alone in the dark. He was crying and holding his knees to his chest. He was alone. He was afraid. And he had no one to help him. In fact, he could hear banging on the door to the dark room he was in. The voices called out in anger, fear, and hatred. Demon. Monster. Murderer. The voices threatened the boy with death. They spoke with contempt for the boy. And the only thing he could think was why? The boy grew older, and he grew numb to the voices. He let them wash over him, barely giving them any acknowledgement. He was still alone, but he was no longer afraid. He put on the mask of happiness, pulling pranks on those that hated him, longing for any form of attention. He grew again, a boy no more. He fought with many great beasts. He held the conviction to protect those precious to him. He even protected those who once hated his very existence. The hatred that he was showered in as a child showed him humility. He knew his own faults and grew from them. The boy who was shown nothing but hate grew into someone who showed nothing but love. He hated no one, and he no longer longed for attention. He fought hard to earn respect, and he finally achieved it. All throughout his life he hated no one. He was a pariah amongst pariah. But he was a light in the dark for all. Luke's eyes opened wide as he sat up in shock. What had he just seen? He looked around the room to the cabin and noticed that Annabeth was missing from the couch, and Talia was sleeping peacefully on one of the armchairs. Luke scrambled to his feet and rushed for the door. He jiggled the handle a few times but noticed that it was locked and began to panic. But once he looked back through the cabin, he noticed that there was an open door leading outside. And in view was a large black stone with flowers surrounding it, almost like it was a memorial. Luke made his way outside and looked at the stone before him. There was writing on it that he couldn't read, and yet, he felt obligated to continue looking, reading the strange print. The sounds of footsteps cut him out of his trance as he turned and saw their host looking at him with an arched brow. So, Luke Castellan, what have you learned from your dreams? Luke looked at his host, whose eyes had changed from the shocking blue to a nearly glowing amber, accentuating the cross-like design that was now his pupil. The blond boy shuffled back away from him in fear. Who are you? He called in fright and continued to back away, until his back touched the cold stone of the monument, forcing him to stay in place. The whiskered man sighed as he stopped his advance. Why do you hold so much hatred in your heart, Luke Castellan? What angers you so? He asked in a calm and inquisitive tone. Luke's eyes narrowed at him in confusion as he reached for the weapon at his waist. I'm warning you, tell me what you are. he ordered as he drew free the sword his ever-loving father decided to gift him with. He loathed having to use it, but whatever kept him alive at the moment was welcomed. The blonde host sighed as he took another step forward. "Turn around, Luke, and tell me what you see," he said to the boy, his voice remaining calm and quiet, even with a length of celestial bronze pointed at his person. Luke leveled the blade at him with hardened eyes. His muscles tensed as he prepared to fight, or run. "No, you tell me what you are or I will make you tell me," he commanded, his legs beginning to shake. His adversary kept his calm exterior, and continued to walk forward. "Well, it's rude to demand answers when you yourself have yet to give any, Luke Castellan. So, will you tell me just who you hate so much? It's bad to just bottle all this in," the man at the point of the sword asked, keeping his eyes locked on Luke. The blond boy growled as he steadied his legs, and tightened his grip on his sword. "What is this? A test? Are the gods testing me? Do they plan to toy with me again?" he yelled out as his eyes narrowed. "Well, I won't do it. I won't be a part of their games anymore. I have my own life, he cried. He raised his sword arm and quickly brought it down in a diagonal slash across the man's chest, only for the blade to pass straight through him, as if it were made of smoke. What? Luke breathed disbelief. How could this guy be mortal? His everything just screamed immortal, or even godly. Luke slumped to his knees as he stared at the man. "Who are you?" he asked in a quiet and defeated tone. The host just sighed as he moved to sit next to the boy. "Just a man who has lived far too long. You can call me Karama if you want, but I need to know, is your hatred pointed at all of the gods, or just one in particular, your father perhaps?" he asked the boy with a tired, yet inquisitive expression, almost as if he had dealt with something similar, and was not excited to have to deal with it again. Luke nodded absently before looking at the ground. He abandoned us, he's a god, and he just let my mother go crazy. He didn't even try to help her. All he's ever done for me was give this sword, and he didn't even do it personally, it just appeared at my doorstep. He rambled out as he slowly shook his head. Karama looked at the boy with sad eyes before sighing. "Truly I am sorry for what you have had to go through, Luke. The neglect of parental love is truly a fate I do not wish upon even my worst of enemies, but," he started to say before turning to Luke, making the blonde look him in the eye. "Hatred is not the way to counter neglect. Hatred is never the pathway to a better future. You do not have to forgive them, but do not hold it against them, and do not let your emotions rule you. I don't much about the world, but I do know some things. I know about the laws the gods have to follow, and I know there was nothing your father could have done without breaking these laws," he reasoned with the boy. Luke looked at him for a moment before he asked the even begging question. "Why? Why would he have a child with someone he couldn't be with?" he asked in defeat, needing an answer. Karama sighed and a soft smile crossed his face as he looked to the monument behind Luke. "Sometimes you just can't stop yourself from falling in love. Even if the consequences are high, love has a way of making someone do something they will regret down the line, but I don't think your father regrets having you, Luke. That sword should be evidence enough," he said as he gestured to the blade. "He knew you would be in danger, so he gifted you something that would help keep you safe, so you could defend yourself. If that wasn't the act of a caring father, then I don't know what is." Luke stayed silent for a pregnant moment, contemplating Karama's words. Was his father really looking out for him? He finally broke the silence when a new question entered his mind. "But they're gods? Why would they need to follow any rules?" he asked his blonde host. Karama merely shrugged his shoulders in response. "Maybe it has to do with the fact that they have such great power, that if they got too involved with the world, or did not have certain rules to follow, they would destroy the very things they represent," he cryptically explained. When Luke gave him a questioning look, Karama sighed and tried to rephrase what he was saying. "Okay, think of it this way, is there a god of the sea?" he asked suddenly as if trying to come up with something. Luke nodded. "Poseidon," he said to the whiskered man who nodded in return. "Yes, well, let's say Poseidon got a little angry one day and decided to flood the world out of spite, what would there be to stop him? If he did that, his domain would be the largest of anyone's and he would hold the most power. What keeps him from doing so?" he asked the boy. Luke thought for a moment before answering. "Well, there are the other gods who would retaliate. They wouldn't want for him to get even more powerful, with them already rivaling Zeus," he explained, gaining a nod from his host. "Yes, the other gods could keep him in line, but what would really stop him from going through with it in secret? If none of the other gods knew what he was doing it, how could he not take all that power like that?" he asked, now leaving Luke stunned and confused on how to answer. Karama nodded at Luke's stumped expression and began to explain. "That, Luke, would be the laws the gods follow. There were beings even before the gods, titans, and most of the primordials, These beings created a set of laws for the world, and if they were not followed, devastation and chaos would rain down on the world, crushing the being responsible. So, they obeyed the laws. Which, sadly, involve some laws that I personally believe to be utterly pointless and cruel, like having to leave behind their children and those they so inconveniently loved behind. He explained to the boy, his voice trailing off towards the end, becoming lost and somewhat yearning. The two blondes sat in silence for a long moment before Luke once again broke the silence. So what exactly is this a monument to? He asked as he looked over his shoulder to the black stone they were leaning against. Kurama raised an eyebrow and looked at himself before humming, a sad look entering his eyes. That, Luke, is a list of my regrets, he said in a quiet voice. And with that, Luke's jaw shut with an audible click. Kurama chuckled half-heartedly, and with a wave of his hand, the once illegible writing morphed into modern-day English. Luke stood up from his seated position and looked at the stone, and a state of confusion washed over him. The writing on the stone was just a list of names. From top to bottom, they were names. Near the top of the stone it looked as if the names were professionally etched into it, but near the bottom, they were scratched into the stone with what could have been a shaking hand. Jiraiya. Senju Tsunade. Shizen. AI. Karabi. Gaara. Kakuro. Hyuga Niji. Hyuga Hayashi. Hyuga Hanabi. Hataki Kakashi. Meito Gai. Rock Lee. Tenten. Inuzuka Kiba. Abirame Shino. Akimichi Choza. Akimichi Choji. Akimichi Chaochu. Yamanaka Inoichi. Yamanaka Ino. Yamanaka Inijin. Sai. Nara Shikamaru. Nara Temari. Nara Shikadai. Nara Shikaku. Nara Yoshino. Sarutobi Kanoamaru. Sarutobi Moegi. Udon. Uchiha Sakura. Uchiha Sarada. Shikaku. Matatabi. Isabu. Son Goku. Koko. Saiken. Gyuki. Kurama. Uzumaki Burrito. Uzumaki Himawari. The names went on and on until one last name was written. Its etching was the most illegible, almost as if writing it was something the person spent several days on perfecting before they even approached the stone, as a last memorial to a person loved more than life itself. Uzumaki Hinata. She was my wife, he heard Kurama say behind him. Luke turned around to look at him with wide eyes. She was the first person to tell me they loved me, and I will never forget her, he said quietly as he looked at the name. Immortality is a nasty thing, especially if it is a curse. Luke, do not let your life be dictated by hatred. Life is far too short for such a thing. He taught me that, he said before he turned to leave. Luke looked at him and tried to say something, but was cut off by the man. Get some more rest, Luke, you have a long journey to go on tomorrow, Kurama said over his shoulder. Luke watched as the man walked away and back around the cabin, out of sight. As he disappeared around the corner, Luke looked back to the stone. Why is his own name on the stone? He thought aloud as he read one of the names. Kurama. Artemis watched the interaction between blonde man and the son of Hermes. At first she had been confused by his mention of dreams, and her confusion only grew as she listened to them interact. Luke suddenly became hostile towards the man, but his anger was subdued by words alone. For a man to be able to defuse a situation like that without the use of his fists was new. Or should she say, unexpected. Sure, she had seen men like that before, but not very often. Usually when a male is met with a sword pointed to his chest, he would retaliate. But this mystery of a person just kept moving forward, and was slashed at. only for her confusion to grow even further when the sword just went right through him, without damaging him, caused red flags to go up in her mind. Just what was he? He wasn't a demigod, that was for sure. She would have most likely have heard one of the gods brag about him due to his power, but he also wasn't a monster. By all intents and purposes, he was mortal. But that couldn't be possible, he had strange, godly powers. Her thoughts were broken when 4 words left man's mouth. She was my wife. She heard him say, drawing the goddess's attention. She could hear the sadness in his voice as he spoke about her. And for a moment, she felt sorry for him. Talia slept soundly, until the images started to play through her head. She tossed, and turned whimpering in fright. You insolent whelp! I curse you! I curse you to unending life! May you watch your precious world fall around you! May you walk through time knowing only solitude and despair! Walk alone through time, little boy! Walk alone for all eternity! With this I curse you! Uzumaki Naruto! A woman said as to a blonde teenager. The image shifted and 2 friends stood across from each other, blood staining their tattered clothes as they looked at each other with heated glares. The image shifted again, and the 2 friends laid side by side, both missing an arm, smiles across their faces. Another shift, and the blonde man stood together with a woman with lavender eyes and dark indigo hair. They stood in a large garden wearing ceremonial clothes. It was a wedding. They stood with one another, as the image continued to shift. They stood together, then a small bundle was resting in the woman's arms. Another shift, and the small bundle appeared to be a young toddler in his mother's arms as the blonde man held another bundle in his arms. The image continued to shift and the children and the woman aged, but the man did not. In the beginning the man had a large grin, but as the images shifted, the man's face became one of horror, guilt, and grief. While the ones he loved most aged, he stayed young. Eventually, the woman grew too old, and the man was distraught, kneeling behind a grave, weeping openly as his grown children tried to comfort him. The image shifted and the blonde man was walking out of the village he lived in, a small pack on his back as he walked away without looking back. And from afar, his dark looking from that he had fought with, stood in the shadows. Still as young as the blonde man himself. The man wandered the world, standing before beasts that put the mountains to shame, and putting them into his own body. A massive monster of sand shifted and howled with crazed humor. A 2-tailed cat, permanently lit aflame with azure flame, purred in the comfort of the sun. A 3-tailed turtle, sitting calmly atop a lake. A 4-tailed monkey resting amongst the jungle trees. A 5-tailed beast that seemed to be a cross between a horse and dolphin, ran with glee through a vast plain. A 6-tailed slug slumbered peacefully in a dark cave. A 6-winged and 1-tailed beetle flew freely through the skies. A 8-tailed ox roamed a cloudy mountain landscape, searching for companion. And finally a 9-tailed fox sat under a large red arch within a golden void, and standing in front of him was the blonde man. The 2 were heatedly discussing something, but their words went unheard. The image shifted again, and the world was covered in fire. The blonde man stood atop a tall mountain, and he had fallen onto his knees, watching the world burn in utter horror. The dark friend, standing by his side with a similar look of horror. And then it all changed. The blonde man sat with his friend, alone in a vacant world. They stared at the sky until 2 beings appeared. One was an old man, a long beard stretching down to his waist was aged and graying. And his companion was a young woman. A flowing red dress was draped over her body as long black hair blew in the non-existent wind. "So, you are the only ones left?" the old man muttered out. The young woman looked to her companion and smirked. "Ha! Looks like I have won this game, you old codger," she yelled out in victory as she looked back to the 2 defeated-looking men. "This world burned, just like I said it would." The old man huffed in annoyance before turning to the 2 men. "Yes, it seems that way. But I still have 2 pieces on the board. So I say this game is a draw," he declared, making the woman whine. "Oh, come on! What are we going to do with the draw?" she whined out childishly. The old man huffed yet again before turning to her. "We start over, but I keep my remaining pieces while you get the first move. That is fair, so do you accept?" he said to the woman. She thought for a moment before smiling and nodding. She held up a hand and the world began to shake. "All right, my first move is to reshape Terra and give it life," she said as the land shook harder and harder until the ground gave way between the 2 friends, sending them on opposite sides of a chasm. The old man stroked his beard as he thought to himself. "That is a rather good first move, Chaos. I am impressed. My first move shall be to give these 2 shelter from your power. They will be my ace," he proclaimed, waving his hand towards the two. Trees began to form around the two friends, and cabins were built from nothing but air. The woman pouted at the old man. "Oh, that isn't very fun order." "Fine, but I place a curse on them. If they are to leave their shelter, they will forevermore change the course of history. Eras will end and begin anew, this I cast upon you," she chanted at the two, their forms beginning to vanish in the trees. The old man huffed one final time before turning away. "All right then, Chaos, let us see how this game plays out." Talia's eyes slowly opened as she groaned awake. She slowly sat up from her spot on one of the lounging chairs next to the dying hearth and popped her stiff joints. She had another weird dream. But this one was different from the others. This one had nothing to do with trees or empty voids. No, this dream was about a completely different person and his own screwed-up life. Talia let out a long yawn as she looked around the cabin and noticed that both Luke and Annabeth weren't inside the building. She would have panicked if she didn't see that the back door was open and Luke was sitting in front of some stone monument. Talia got up slowly as she kept stretching and began to walk towards the door. And then she remembered something. "That jackass drugged us," she mentally roared as she remembered how she had fallen asleep. That blonde jerk must have spiked their food and made them fall asleep. She knew he wasn't above doing that. She did just get done seeing the guy's past after all. "When I get my hands on him," she grumbled as she walked out of the cabin. "Hey Luke, you alright?" she asked as she walked up to her friend. She had noticed the distant look on his face and looked at him with worry in her eyes. But it seemed she was worried for nothing, since apparently her voice was enough to knock him out of whatever funk he was in. He shook his head and looked up at her after blinking a few times. "Oh, hey Talia, you're up. So, you have your heart-to-heart with Kurama yet?" he asked the punk-style girl, earning a confused look from her. What? Who the heck is Kurama?" she asked in confusion. Luke blinked a few times in shock. "Oh, Kurama's the blonde guy, you know, the one whose cabin this is," he explained. "You did have a weird dream like me and Annabeth, right?" Talia blinked for a second before nodding. "Yeah, what was yours about? Because mine was all kinds of messed up," she asked the blonde. Luke looked down for a moment, that vacant look returning to his eyes. "Well, mine was about a little boy. He was hated by everyone for something he didn't know about, but he never held it against them. He just wanted to prove to them that he could be worthy of their respect, and that he could never hate anyone," he explained before looking to the stone behind him. "Kurama talked to me after I woke up. He told me that life was too short to go on hating people, and acting solely on that hate," he said as he looked at the stone, a far-off look in his eyes. Talia was able to put the dots together. Knowing Luke on a personal level, she knew he had a pretty deep grudge against his father for how his mother turned out. So that blonde guy tried to talk him out of his grudge on Hermes, she thought to herself before she looked to the black memorial stone. Her breath caught as she found a name she recognized. It was the same name that was on the grave of the lavender-eyed woman in her dream. "I knew he looked familiar," she mumbled to herself, a sad look entering her eyes. But that look only lasted for a short amount of time before it turned into one of fury. What kind of a monster would play around with the lives of so many? Chaos? Order? They would treat the world and those who live in it like it was some sort of game. Well, Blondie really needs to go give those two a piece of his mind. She mentally snarled as she turned on her heel and began to walk away. Luke turned to her with a confused look. "Talia? Where are you going?" he asked as she walked away. "I'm looking for Kurama," she said over her shoulder and rounded around the cabin. Kurama sat where he was before, on the stump of the grand tree, observing the hunters set up camp. "You know, I could make this go a lot faster if you'd let me help out," he called with an amused look as several of the hunters glared at him. One walked up to him and shook her head. "I am sorry, sir, but we need not thy help to set up our camp," the hunter's lieutenant said with a face that said she was forcing herself not to scowl at him. Zoe Nightshade did not know why they were ordered to treat him with respect, but if her mistress ordered so, then she would obey. Although she could not argue his power. He had successfully captured all of them, including Lady Artemis, without moving a single muscle. She looked at him, trying to keep her eyebrow from twitching as she noticed that their pack of wolves had taken to sitting with him again. The man waved her off with a wry grin. Fine, I was just suggesting I make some cabins for you so you wouldn't need to set up tents," he offhandedly as he rubbed one of the wolf's ears, getting it to roll onto its side. It was at this point Zoe had enough. "How are you doing that?" she asked in annoyance. She had never seen the pack act so docile, especially around men. Before the blonde could respond, a voice cut him off from behind. "He's channeling nature through his very being, making an empathy link to the pack, making them docile," Artemis said as she walked up from behind Kurama and sat down on the edge of the stump. "But I want to know, is how you are doing it?" Not only would you need to be a nature spirit, but you'd also need to be a godly being with nature being in your domain. So, what are you? She asked as she crossed her arms, narrowing her eyes at him in suspicion. Kurama looked at her with a deadpan stare before he shrugged. One of a kind, I guess, he said nonchalantly, blowing off her question. Artemis guffawed at him before scowling. Please don't speak like that, you remind me too much of my brother, she gritted out. And that wasn't the answer I asked for. I asked you what you are. Are you human? Mortal? Godly? What? She pressed, trying her hardest to figure out just what he was. Kurama took up a thinking pose before he smiled wide enough to make his eyes close, making him have a fox-like look. Why, I'm just a tricky fox in disguise. And to answer your questions in order. No, no, and no. I am none of the above. I am simply me, he said before he stood up from the stump and jumped off. Besides, we have an angry girl roaming around looking for me. I'll see you around, he said as he disappeared around the cabin for a second time. Artemis just stared at where he was sitting in shock. Did he just blow us off while answering my question at the same time? She asked herself before growling out in frustration. He acts just like my idiot brother, she cried out in annoyance before looking to where she could hear a giggling girl. Annabeth was sprawled on her back playing with a few of the pups from the pack, letting them crawl on her and roll around. She looked to Zoe with a raised eyebrow. Sorry, milady, but the man told her she could play with the pups. Zoe apologized. Artemis sighed while shaking her head and sitting back down. At least he doesn't act like a pig like Apollo. So, Talia, you want to talk about your problems before they blow up? Kurama asked as he walked up behind Talia, making the girl swing around to look at him. You! I've been looking for you for like 15 minutes. She yelled while jabbing a finger at him. Kurama shrugged before responding. You could have looked to the front of the cabin where all the noise is coming from. This got Talia to clam up and stop talking. And just like that, the situation turned on its head. So Talia Grace, what have you learned from your dreams? Kurama asked with a serious tone to his voice. All of the noise from before went silent, as if it were only Kurama and Talia standing in a quiet field. Well, besides the fact that the creators of the world are total jackweeds, you had a pretty crappy life, she said to him while crossing her arms, completely killing the serious feel that Kurama was trying to make. Kurama stared at her for a moment before a smile cracked onto his face. And then a chuckle, and then he started to blow into a heartfelt laugh. He sat down with a sigh to try and calm himself before he looked up to the punk girl. You just hit the nail right on the head with that, he said, still trying to hold off a snicker from how easily his life had been summed up. You know, that sounded like something I would have said when I was your age. But hey, great minds think alike, right? He said as he began to stand back up. But in all seriousness, Talia, what have you really learned? He asked again, placing a hand on her shoulder. Talia sighed and looked down to the ground. Our lives are nothing but pieces on a board, it's all a game, she said sadly, not wanting to believe that everything is just for the sick amusement of two higher beings. Kurama nodded to what she said. While it's sad, it is the truth, he agreed, but before the mood could take any further of a dive, a smirk appeared on his face. But you need to look on the bright side, he started, getting Talia to look back up to him. It is still your life, make the best of it. Do what you feel, and enjoy your life however you wish. And if you find something worth fighting for, protect it with everything you have. Like I told Luke, life is short, shorter than anyone can ever realize. But that is precisely what makes it truly precious. Life only matters because it ends, so you must always strive to make the best of it, he said with a smirk, making Talia smile at his optimism. Here was someone who had all the reason in the world to be cold, bitter, and hateful to the world. But there he stood, as happy as one could possibly be, in spite of all the difficulty, hardship, and pain he had experienced. He was still a kind, compassionate, and all-around decent human being, if that was what she could call him. He was a being that was older than the gods, or titans, or giants, or even most monsters, not to mention the human itself. So that sounded like quite the pep talk. What do you got for me? She asked with a raised eyebrow. She already knew her own faults. Yeah, she was a bit abrasive. Sure, she could be a little violent. And heck, maybe she was a tad emotionally explosive. But what could this eternity-old being have to say to her that would be life-altering, like he had with Luke? She had already seen the biggest, ugliest secret the cosmos had to hold. What could be worse? Kurama sighed and looked at the girl with serious eyes. Oh, this couldn't be good, could it? Talia, all I have for you is a warning, a piece of advice one you will hopefully take to heart. He began before placing a hand on her shoulder. Be wary of those who grant life without thought, he told her, earning a strange look from the girl. Trust me, child, if you are ever offered the prospect of immortality, make sure you think very carefully before accepting. Take it from someone who has seen it all, and been through it all, Immortality is a curse. It ruins the cycle of life and death, and interrupts nature. Immortality is a risky business. Many think it's a blessing, but, after I've seen, I pity those fools. I'm not telling you to turn down immortality if you're ever offered, I just warn you to think before you make that kind of sacrifice. Talia looked at the blonde man in shock, before she nodded, conviction in her eyes. I understand. It's not like I have a large chance of being immortal anyway, but I'll keep you in mind if the time ever comes up, she said to the blonde, earning a smile from the man. He held up his fist with a grin. Good, because I would like for at least one of my visitors to take my advice to heart for once, he exclaimed, earning a snort from Talia. Yeah, based on what I've seen from you, I don't think you went and told my father to be a womanizer that cheats on his wife every other day, she said, lifting her hand to meet his, bumping his fist with her own. Kurama shrugged and let his eyes glow a little brighter. Yeah, I'll need to have a discussion with old Sparky Boom Man about keeping a healthy family lifestyle if I ever see him again. He chuckled out, his words holding a slight bit of venom held for the king of gods. Talia burst into laughter before she and Kurama began to walk back towards the front of the cabin. Talia and Kurama walked up to see that the hunters finally finished setting camp and noticed that Artemis speaking with Annabeth, and Luke standing by on the porch to the cabin, rocking on one of the chairs while several of the hunters occasionally sent glares his way if they caught him looking at them. Talia looked to Kurama with a raised eyebrow. When they get here? She asked after nudging him in the side to get his attention. He hummed for a moment and shrugged. About an hour and a half before you woke up, he explained with a nonchalant tone before walking over to where Annabeth was. So, little miss, how have the hunters been treating you? He said in a light-hearted tone as he walked up to Annabeth and placed a hand on her head, ruffling her hair, earning a whine from the girl. Artemis narrowed her eyes at him slightly, but let it slide. Lady Artemis was just telling me about the hunters before you showed up, the little girl explained. Kurama made a quiet O before turning to Artemis. Well, Lady Artemis, I would kindly ask you to hold off on transactions or blessing giving while you are here. They could possibly backfire due to you being cut off from your domains here, he warned the goddess with a knowing look. Artemis withheld a growl, knowing fair well that she held almost no power in this realm, but that didn't mean she could plant the idea of joining her hunt in a possible addition. Very well, Kurama, I will save any more of my business for once we leave your grove, she said with a reluctant nod. Kurama smiled brightly at her while nodding. Good, now, why don't you and Talia take Luke back into the cabin and rest a bit more? It's still the middle of the night, and you three have a long journey before you. The next morning found Luke, Talia and Annabeth standing with the hunters at the entrance of the grove, Kurama standing before them. He walked to Luke and placed a hand on his shoulder, giving him a knowing look. Remember, hatred will only lead to further suffering, for both parties involved, he said in a hushed tone, earning a curt nod from the blonde boy. Kurama nodded before moving to Talia. He gave her a smile before ruffling her spiked hair. Remember my advice, kiddo. You might just need it in the future, he said with a smirk as she whined and swatted his hand off her head. She gave him a half-hearted glare before he chuckled and moved on to Annabeth. Kurama gave the small gilf a warm smile before setting himself on a knee before her. Now, Annabeth, I have a final question for the wise girl, he said to the blonde girl, earning a slight giggle. What? She asked with a slight smile. Well, I see that Luke here has his sword, and Talia has her shield and spear, but do you have any weapons? He asked with a knowing smirk. Annabeth pouted slightly before shaking her head. No, I haven't found one or have been gifted one yet, she explained, making one of the hunters perk up. Oh, you can have one of my, she began before Kurama held something up to Annabeth. The blonde girl gasped as she looked at the blade before her. It was a medium-sized dagger, or kunai if she remembered what it was called. But this one was special. This one had 3 blades, one main blade and 2 others working as guards of sorts. On its handle was a strange marking that made her head spin trying to understand, but before she could get a further headache she looked back up to Kurama. I think you know the importance of this blade. So I know you would do it in honor by using it for the right reasons, he began. Remember, Annabeth, this blade was once my father's, so it is even older than myself. So, make sure you keep it in top shape for combat. And one day when you are in your darkest hour, when it seems you have lost all hope, pray on this blade, and throw it with all your might. And a light will appear to guide you out of the dark, he said before gently placing the blade into her hands. Now, it's time for you all to go. I don't think my old student will be happy if his daughters are out of his sight for too long, he said before gently nudging Annabeth to go. The hunters began to leave with a command of their mistress. Talia and Luke gave one last appreciative look to their blonde host before following after the hunters. Annabeth began to walk away as Kurama stood. Goodbye, Annabeth, may your will of fire burn brightly for years to come, he said and began to walk away, only to feel a weight press into his leg. He looked down to see Annabeth giving him a hug with tightly shut eyes. "This isn't goodbye, it's see you later," she said before Kurama smiled and scooped the girl up in a tight hug. "Yeah, I'll see you later, Annabeth Chase. Watch your friends' backs, they will always have yours." And with that his guest finally left his domain, the man out of time watching them leave until they were no longer within his sight, no longer within his realm. He sighed as he walked into his cabin. Watching them leave is always the hardest, he thought to himself before he noticed that the hearth fire was burning strongly, a young woman holding a poking rod, prodding the flames to life. She turned to him and smiled. "I sensed the hearth was missing family once Artemis arrived, so I thought I'd come see if I could make the flames burn brighter for you." Kurama raised an eyebrow as he looked at the young woman. She sat before the fire, gently smiling up at him and beckoning for him to sit by the fire. She had short, shoulder-length brown hair, with slight curls that allowed it to frame her tanned face. As the blond man moved to sit next to the woman, he noticed that in her eyes danced a fire that washed whatever they viewed in warmth and comfort. "Thank you for tending the flames, young one," he said as he took his place next to the hearth. "But tell me, those who normally come here are in need of something. Guidance, a place to stay, or as of recently, someone to find. So, young one, what brings you to my grove?" he asked the woman, staring into the fire, watching the flames dance and curl into the air. The woman covered her mouth with a hand as a melodious laugh rang throughout the cabin. "Oh, trust me, I am far from young. I haven't even been allowed to be young ever since my younger brothers and sisters were born. But I did hear that you helped my mother with my problematic little brother while my father was being, well, a terrible father." She giggled out as she resumed tending to the fire, making the flames, a small smile on her face. Kurama nodded in acceptance. "Well, compared to your brothers and sisters, you may be the elder. But to me, you are but a little girl, in need of someone to speak to, am I correct?" he said before making to stand. "Would you care for something to eat? Something to drink?" he said, making his way towards the kitchen. The woman shook her head. "Oh no, I'm quite all right," she said as Kurama reached for a pair of glasses. "Oh come now, I can't just let a visitor come and not share in a drink or two," he said before looking over a bottle that was stored in a cabinet. "I mean, I'll need to drink this bottle of sake at some point, it's just been sitting in here for I don't know 3? Maybe 4,000 years," he said before taking the 2 glasses and the bottle over to the hearth and sitting next to the woman. The woman sighed before giving the bottle a once-over, and then reached for a glass. "Oh, why not? I do not normally drink, but this seems to be a special occasion," she said as Kurama poured her a glass. He chuckled as he stopped pouring once the glass was half full. "Ah, that a girl," he said before he filled his glass. "To the ever-flowing time that shapes the world and destroys it at the same time," he murmured as he raised his glass and downed the drink in a single sip, not even fazed in the slightest by the aged alcohol. The woman chose to simply sip on her drink, but widened her eyes and began to cough at its potency. "My, that is stronger than some of Dionysius' brews," she said as she reined in her breathing and nervously glanced at the drink. "How can you drink something so potent?" she asked as he filled up another glass and drank it down just as fast as the first. He sighed in content as he set the glass down. "Well, alcohol has never really had any effect on my system, and my taste buds have been shot for the last few centuries, so I can't really taste it, but I do enjoy the slight burn to it." The woman raised an eyebrow at him before she began to giggle. "Slight burn? I might say that was like fire going down my throat, and I should know, fire is a part of my domain," she said in amusement that he would call something that strong a slight burn. Kurama snickered at that, and shrugged his shoulders. "I guess after shooting a few million fireballs and globs of lava from my mouth, I kind of lose a feel for that sort of thing," he responded with a grin. The two sat for a moment, the woman nursing her drink in her hands while Kurama gazed into the fire. "You know, I haven't quite gotten your name yet, unless you want me to refer to you as the pretty woman with the glowing eyes," he said as he filled his cup with the last of the potent drink. The woman smiled slightly before answering. "Please, I'm not that pretty. You should see my younger sister Hera if you want pretty, but that you for the compliment either way. And my name is Hestia, by the way, the eldest of Kronos' children and all gods, and goddess of the hearth and home," she said, giving Kurama a nodding smile. Kurama chuckled as he finished the last of his drink. "Trust me, Lady Hestia, to me, pretty is pretty. And you're pretty," he said with a playful wink as he stood to place his glass in his sink and tossed the bottle in a waste bin. Hestia giggled while covering her mouth with a single hand. "You should meet Aphrodite. I think you two would get along swimmingly," she said between chuckles. Kurama raised an eyebrow before taking his place by the fire. "Oh really? Well, remind me to talk to this Aphrodite once I leave here if I leave here before you all fade," he said before mumbling the last part, his eyes glazing slightly as he looked into the flames once again. The two of them sat in an awkward silence for a few moments before Kurama broke the silence. So, you still haven't told me what it is you came here for? He said in a nonchalant one while laying onto his back next to the fire. Hestia sat for a moment, absent-mindedly poking at the flames to make them burn brighter before she answered. I don't know really. I just felt something when your presence was made known to me after Artemis wandered in here. It felt odd, yet familiar at the same time, like a presence that was once always a part of my life, left for a long time, and then it finally returned. She said, not looking away from the flames. I guess I just came here to see what exactly that disturbance was. Kurama looked away from the flame and to the goddess. So, did you find what you were looking for? He asked in a quiet tone, confused on what the goddess had told him. He may have only had a few visitors, but so far, each of them have had a specific reason to be there, be it something they needed to learn, something they needed to forget, or just a simple place to stay. He had been able to sense just what they needed, and worked hard to see their needs fulfilled. But he couldn't get a read on her. It was at first shocking that he could feel nothing from her. Hell, she had even snuck into his sanctuary without him noticing, and now he had no idea why she was there. Now it was just getting annoying because even she didn't really know why she was there. Not that he really minded. It was nice to have company, especially if they were of the beautiful goddess variety. But it was just, he didn't like being surprised like this. He had lived far too long and had enough with the strangeness of the world. So, he was rightfully annoyed that he now had a beautiful goddess in his house, with neither of them knowing why she was really there enjoying an alcoholic beverage sitting next to a warm fire. Why was he annoyed again? This sounded great. Hestia shrugged as she continued to look into the flame. I don't know, I feel like the disturbance is close, but I can't exactly find it. She turned to Kurama, tearing her gaze away from the fire. But I do have a question for you, she said to the blonde, earning a raised eyebrow from the man. Oh really? Well shoot, what's up? What was that you told Annabeth? The will of fire? She asked with an expectant look. I've never heard that saying before. Kurama gave her a small smile before turning to the fire with a content sigh. Where tree leaves dance, one shall find flames. The fire's shadow will illuminate the village, and once as again, tree leaves shall bud anew, he said before turning to Hestia. As long as you fight alongside your family, your friends, neighbors and loved ones, as long as you fight to protect all that is important, you shall know true strength. The will to never give up, to never say quit. And the will to always fight for a better tomorrow. That is the will of fire. Hestia looked at him, and could actually feel the confidence radiate off of the man, his conviction and belief in his own words, and most of all, it spoke to her. She was a goddess of family. So the belief that as long as you were with your family, and fought to protect them, was a belief she could wholeheartedly get behind. She let a wide smile grace her face as she thought over his words. I think I like that way of thinking, I like it a lot. Hestia left the sanctuary a little later in the day, believing that if she stayed for too long that the other gods would become worried for her whereabouts. So Kurama walked her out of the grove and bid her farewell before returning to his cabin, and resumed his meditation. Once he sat next to the hearth, he crossed his legs, placed his hands in his lap and breathed out a deep sigh. Well, it was interesting while it lasted, he mumbled to himself, happy that he had so many guests in such a short period of time. But now it was back to the monotony of eternity. Back to sitting alone, and back to waiting. Maybe someone will come by in a century or two. Maybe they won't. Only time could tell. But it seemed he wouldn't have to wait too long, because the next time he opened his eyes was when he felt someone poke his cheek. He cracked a single, amused eye open and was treated to the curious smile of a young girl. You were really out of it, Kurama, she said before sitting next to the hearth. At first Kurama was confused on just who this child was, until he looked into her eyes and noticed the same fiery spark that the goddess that had just left had. Hestia? He said in confusion. What are you doing back here? He said to the girl. No one had ever come back. They usually just stayed until he fixed what was needed, or the time they were there was sufficient for what they needed. She shrugged her shoulders and poked at the fire. I dunno, the feeling never went away after I left, so I decided to come back, and after I showed up it disappeared. Weird, right? She said with a happy smile. Kurama looked at the girl before chuckling. Is it me, or are you younger than I remember? He said with a smirk. Hestia nodded to him as she poked the flame. I like to take this form most of the time, it makes me feel younger and happier. Also it helps for my approachability. You know, not all people would want to approach one of the eldest gods if they looked like they were super scary or powerful, right? She said with a cheeky smile. Kurama chuckled and nodded along, also noticing that when she was in her younger form she also acted like she was younger, a little more carefree and a lot happier. "Well, I can't offer you any sake now that you went and got young on me. Would you like a glass of juice?" he asked with an amused smile as he moved towards the kitchen. "Orange, please," she called to him. He just shook his head and produced a carton of orange juice from the fridge that magically restocked itself whenever he closed the door. "I don't know, this could be fun," he thought to himself as he got his repeat guest a glass of juice. Everything was not going to plan. Zoe had been poisoned by Landon, they found Artemis holding up the sky, Luke had Talia pinned, and Annabeth had no idea how she and Percy were going to defeat Atlas. It was a Titan against two kids, and he was showing them just how outmatched they were when it came to the divine. The Titan of Strength was looking down at them with a bored expression as he lazily spun his javelin in his right hand. "Come now, I thought you would be a worthy challenge, Percy Jackson, or has Ares gotten weaker over the past few millennia?" he grunted out before slamming his weapon against the flat of Percy's blade. The black-haired son of Poseidon was launched through the air from the force of the strike, his blade, riptide, reverting to its pen form and landing on the other side of the mountain top. As Percy slid to a stop, a silver arrow was launched through the air towards Atlas, only for the Titan to catch the offending projectile without even the need to look at it. The Titan slowly turned his head to source of the attack with a bemused expression on his face. "Oh?" he said in amusement, seeing Zoe barely standing, her bow held loosely in her hand as she panted in effort, Landon's poison spreading quickly through her veins. "So the traitorous little hunter still has some fight left in her? Well, that is a surprise indeed. Why don't I fix that?" he said before growling in frustration as a second arrow was launched at him. He batted it away with his javelin and began to stomp his way towards the girl, only for him to take a sharp breath in pain as ichor began to spew from his leg. "Grh!" he roared in frustration as he batted his attacker away, sending an invisible Annabeth careening across the mountain top with a pained scream. When she landed, her cap of invisibility flew off her head, showing that she now had a busted lip and was bleeding from a wound somewhere on her head, which was causing blood to trickle down along her temple. She coughed a few times from the rough landing, and began struggling to stand back up. The knife she had used to pierce Atlas' leg was lying a few feet away from her. The three-pronged blade was so far the only thing that had been able to even remotely harm the Titan and his stone-like skin. As she slowly crawled over to the blade, she looked up to see Percy re-engage the Titan, his blade clashing against the javelin with a brilliant spray of sparks. But his battle was short-lived as he was overpowered yet again by Atlas' superior strength, experience, and speed, as Atlas' boot catching Percy in the stomach, sending him flying once again across the mountain top. Percy was panting hard from exhaustion and pain. He felt a good few pops from that last hit, indicating a broken, or at least cracked, rib, more than likely several. Leaning against his sword, he stood once again, staring hard at Atlas' bemused smirk. "I'll give you this, Jackson, you really know how to take a hit. You're the only person besides the gods to ever survive this long against me. But I have had enough of this game, how about I put you out of your misery?" the Titan said as he began to stroll his way over to the son of Poseidon. Percy looked around for a way out, a way to fight back. There was a small pool of water, that would be enough to at least give him a fighting chance, but his only problem was that there was 50 feet and a Titan between him and the potential source of power. Not good at all," he mumbled to himself, a sense of dread seeping into his bones. Atlas looked down on the boy with a cruel smirk as he lifted his javelin. "Say goodbye, Percy Jackson," he said before he brought his weapon down. And to the sound of a terrified scream, blood was spilled on the top of empty Tamalpay. "I swear, Hestia, how can this get better each time I eat it?" Karama shouted in pure bliss as he sat the large, now empty, bowl of ramen down onto the table. He was able to get a laugh out of the goddess, her using one of her hands to cover her mouth. "Oh please, yours is still much better than how I make it," an adult form Hestia said with a wide smile. She had been coming to the sanctuary, as she had decided to call it, for many years now. She would decide to pop in every now and then whenever she wasn't busy with her godly duties, which sadly were not as often as she would have liked. With technology now and city life being as popular as it was now, families spent less and less time with each other. But she knew there was still one place that she could count on to have family be a priority. Karama was a very connected person. Once you spend enough time with him, and made it into his circle of friends, you were family. And it wasn't just a family friend you would meet up with every other year kind of family, she could feel it through her domain. He made people into his immediate family. Pure strangers could become a sibling if given enough time. Which made Hestia very happy. If only more people were as loving. But that still left many questions about him open. Even after the few years she had gotten to know him, she had yet to learn anything new. All she had to go on was what the three children had learned. A tortured past, a long struggle, and a traumatically prolonged existence. Though, she did get a few good stories about her younger brother's time in the sanctuary. No way! She laughed as Kurama told her of Zeus' training. Yes way, he responded. Just try saying the words Senin Garoshi, 1,000 years of death, around him, see how he reacts. He chortled before standing and moving towards the front door. Hestia watched him walk away with a confused look on her face before he reached for the door and turned to her. Wanna see something cool? He said with a mischievous smile. The goddess smiled back at him and made her way to the door. Of course. The sun was setting outside of the sanctuary's cabin. Kurama led Hestia out to the main stump in front of the cabin and gestured for her to take a seat. The goddess did so as she watched Kurama's actions with a curious gaze. Kurama walked out into the center of the clearing and closed his eyes, standing perfectly still for what seemed like minutes. Hestia just watched with a patient gaze as she waited for whatever it was he was going to do. She waited until the sun was just setting past the trees. And then it happened. Kurama clasped his hands and an overwhelming power flooded the sanctuary, causing a golden aura to appear around the man. And all at once, as the sun passed by the trees, the wild flowers, the grass, and the tree leaves all shone a brilliant crimson gold, making the sanctuary itself seem as if it stood at the center of a grand hearth. And at its epicenter was a shining sun, filling the land with its warmth, nurturing the land itself with its gifted light. And the goddess was speechless as the lights finally died down with the setting sun. She could only mutter a single word. Beautiful. Kurama looked at her awestruck expression with a warm smile as the last of the light finally died down, the sun finally set. But he wasn't done, there was one last thing to do. He raised his arms out from his sides, a soft blue aura escaping his fingertips, once again flooding the sanctuary with light, but this was no grand flame, no warmth of the heavens. This was the light of the cool night, the calm dusk, and the fairy tale forest. The plants that once shone a brilliant gold, now blinked with a soft blue, a crystal light, the light flickering in and out amongst the trees, the flowers all facing the heavens, shining their cool light. And once again, the millennia-old goddess was stunned by the beauteous light that the man cast for her, and her alone. Kurama walked over to the goddess, a soft smile on his face. He watched her as she walked to a nearby flower, caressing it gently as its light blinked in and out, like the heartbeat of the forest itself. He walked up next to her, and the two sat down in the meadow of the sanctuary. Kurama looked to the goddess, and smiled even wider. Hestia, he started. Hestia looked to his eyes and blinked in shock at the vibrance they now had. Through the years she had known him, his eyes seemed to be dull and lost of passion. But now they shone with a brilliance of their own, like looking into the pools of a deep ocean, a bottomless marine that swept up all within its gaze. Thank you for everything, he said. I haven't had anyone come back before, and to be frank, I thought that you would have left for good after the first day. It has been far too long since I've had someone to connect to like this, he said before taking her hands in his. Thank you for returning to this old man when no one else would. Thank you for showing me a companionship I have long forgotten, and for giving me a light in my dark. Hestia listened to the man before her with widened eyes. Her heart beat quickening, nearly skipping as he spoke to her. She had never felt this before. What was going on? It frightened her, but at the same time excited her. She had never felt this euphoria before, this primal thought that brought her even closer to the man before her. And she waited unbated for the man's next words. Hestia, he started to say, before his eyes widened, letting go of the goddess' hands and bolting to his feet. Hestia was shocked by Kurama's sudden movement, nearly squeaking out in surprise as he stood and took 3 steps away from her. She was about to rise and stop him from whatever he was about to do. She needed to know exactly what it was he was about to say. What was he so close to confessing? However, she was stopped when he pressed his index and middle finger to her forehead, and giving her a light push. I am being called. It is finally time for this old fox to rejoin the world and stretch his legs a bit. I'll be back, Hestia, he said before he disappeared in a golden flash. Hestia just watched as he flashed away in shocked silence. She brought her hand up to her forehead and lightly touched where his hand had been. A crimson blush taking over her cheeks. Just what am I feeling? Annabeth watched in terror as Atlas raised his javelin to finish off the son of Poseidon. She needed to do something. Percy was going to die if she didn't do something. But her mind couldn't process what to do in time. Atlas had his javelin at its height, and was ready to swing down onto the son of the sea. She couldn't do anything. She was going to watch her, arguably, best friend die right in front of her, and she could do nothing. She rose to her feet, charging the Titan, hoping to be able to stop him, with her own body if need be. The voices in her head guiding her on her path. I never give up. I won't let a single comrade die. Give up trying to make me give up. She drew her three-bladed dagger and held it high in the air. Please! Mom, Poseidon, anyone! Please let it make it! She prayed as she yelled with all her might, throwing the knife as hard as she could towards the Titan, and blood poured onto empty Tamalpay. Percy watched as Atlas lowered his weapon. Time seemed to slow as his life flashed before his eyes. All in all, it kinda sucked. He always had the worst of luck. Being stuck with and having to deal with smelly Gabe for the majority of his life so far, getting kicked out of school nearly every year, constantly moving around, never actually getting to make any real friends. And now that he had some actual friends, he was going to die young. He would never get to see what was to be in the future. He was never going to get to grow up like he wanted. He was going to die. As the javelin neared, something caught his eye. It was for only the briefest of moments, but he saw what could have been Annabeth's weird three-bladed knife fly right between him and the javelin's point. And that was all he saw before a blinding flash of golden light overtook his and Atlas' forms. Percy felt something warm splash against his face just before the light died down, but before he opened his eyes, he heard a voice he had no recollection of. "Oh, that hurts like hell, you know," a deep voice said in a cold tone, prompting the son of the sea to open his eyes in shock. Right in front of him was a tall, blond man. A white cloak with red flames licking the bottom hem fluttered before him. And the only thing that kept the boy from his immediate death was the left hand of the man, the javelin that was meant for him, piercing clean through the flesh of the man he did not know. Atlas looked at the man with pure rage. He had enough of people getting in his way. All he needed to do was kill that Spec Jackson and all would be alright. But here was someone new. Completely unexpected, stopping his javelin with his bare hand. "Out of my wa dash!" The Titan began to roar in annoyance before something slammed into his stomach, making his entire body burst into pain. "How do you like it? Huh!" the man said just before the golden sphere of energy he slammed into the Titan's stomach exploded with a spiraling force that sent Atlas flying through the air and nearly off the face of the mountain. The only thing stopping him was the boot of the same man that sent him flying, slamming into his back with a satisfying crunch. Atlas, the Titan of strength, fell to the ground in pure pain, the spiral-shaped wound over his chest and stomach, pouring golden ichor onto the ground as he coughed up just as much from having his back nearly shattered. The blond man pulled the javelin out of his palm and looked to Percy with a confident smirk. "You okay there, Gaki?" he said as the wound in his hand steamed and healed quickly. The only thing Percy could do was nod with his mouth gaping in shock. Annabeth looked at Kurama in utter shock. Did she summon him? And then, she remembered his words. "When you are in your darkest hour, pray on this knife, and throw it as hard as you can, and then light shall appear to guide you through the dark." She did exactly that. She summoned the man that looked after her while they were on the run. The man whose life she had dreamed about all those years ago. The man who had given her her first, and best, weapon. And he was powerful. Kurama looked over to the blonde daughter of Athena and smiled broadly. "Annabeth, it is a pleasure to see you again. But I hoped it would have been under better circumstances," he said before growling the last part, turning back to a quickly rising Atlas. The wounds over his chest slowly healing up after he repaired his back. "You little shit!" Atlas roared in fury. "I will gut you before I give you the pleasure of dying!" he roared as he charged the blonde, a new javelin flashing into his hand. "We'll have to catch up later, Annabeth. I have a slight nuisance to deal with," he said as he brought up his left hand, clutching the blade the girl had thrown. Kurama let out a slow breath as a barely visible green aura coated the blade. As Atlas neared, he raised the blade and gave it a swing, the aura extending out towards the Titan. Atlas, however, wasn't a millennia-old warrior for nothing and sacrificed his javelin to redirect the extended blade enough so he could close the gap between the two. "Die!" he roared as he launched a fist forward with all of his might. Kurama reared back his bandaged arm, the appendage glowing brilliantly as he readied himself to send a punch flying. And when he did, the two fists collided, and for the absolute briefest of moments, the two were at a stalemate, until one finally gave out within the span of a second. Atlas' hand shattered after a moment, his fingers splaying out in different directions as the blonde followed through with his strike, bending the Titan's arm back, snapping the elbow, and completely dislocating the shoulder. And as he finished his punch, he quickly spun and delivered a devastating kick to the Titan's still healing chest, once again ragdolling the Titan across the mountain top. "You're weak." The Titan rolled to his feet as soon as he stopped sliding across the mountain and readied himself to charge back at the insufferable blonde, only for him to meet the blonde's fist in his face, sending him crashing into the ground. "You're slow." Atlas coughed up his golden ichor as he slowly began to rise from the ground, only for the blonde's boot to press down onto his head, shattering the ground beneath him. And most of all, this fight is completely boring, Kurama complained. And here I thought I would be able to stretch my legs for once after all these millennia, but now I am just completely disappointed, he said with an audible sigh. From her spot underneath the sky, Artemis watched in silent shock. The man she had once met several years ago had suddenly appeared right before Atlas could kill Poseidon's son, and then he proceeded to pummel the Titan with an impossible ease. Sure, she would have been able to defeat Atlas on her own, even in her weakened state, but she would have had to fight as hard as she could to do it. But he just destroyed a Titan, with seemingly no effort. Excuse me, ma'am, you wouldn't mind if I took this for you, right? A familiar voice said from her side, causing the goddess to look to the source. Huh! Was her intelligent response from a duplicate of the blonde man currently knocking the ichor out of Atlas. The clone of Kurama snickered at her confused expression and placed his hands upon the burden. I'll take that as a yes, he said before lifting the sky from her shoulders. The clone's face gained a strained look to it before a slight blue hue encompassed its hands. Doton, Kijigen no Jutsu *, the clone mentally called as the weight of the sky lessened in his grasp. The clone gave a sigh of relief as he easily hefted the sky onto his shoulders and let the shocked goddess of the hunt escape. Go, the boss can handle the Titan, but it seems your hunter is in grave need of your help, the clone said with a slight grunt while shifting the sky's weight. All Artemis could do was nod and make her way over to her lieutenant. Back with Kurama and Atlas, the Titan was again being shown precisely how intimate his face could be with the ground. Kurama sighed in annoyance as he lifted the battered Titan up by the back of his shirt. Alright, now this is just sad, you ready over there? He called over to his clone, earning a nod from it. Alright then. Here he comes! He yelled as he physically threw the Titan through the air towards the clone. As Atlas approached, the clone let out a small breath and prepared to time this up. 3, 2, 1 now! Kawarimi no Jutsu, * he called as a plume of smoke enveloped himself and the flying Titan. Soon after the smoke appeared, it vanished, showing that the clone and the Titan of strength had switched places, the clone now flying through the air, and Atlas once again holding the sky. No, wait, is this lighter than before? Atlas mused as he began to curse the blonde man for trapping him once again, only for the flying clone to gain an evil grin. Not for long the clone cheered as he placed a hand on the sky. Doton, Kajugen no Jutsu *, the clone said before dispelling in a plume of smoke. Suddenly, Atlas fell to his knees, shouting in effort and cursing in pain. Kurama looked at his handiwork with a smirk while dusting off his shoulders. Not bad if I say so myself. What do you think, Anna Luke, is that you? Kurama began to say before turning to see a gobsmacked Luke holding a pin Talia to the ground, a blade pressed up to her neck. Kurama looked at the two, from the blade, to Luke, and back to Talia, several times before a dark look appeared on his face. Luke, just what have you done? The blonde man growled in fury, his blue eyes turning red with a slit pupil. Soon his entire visage just screamed bloodlust, a light growl escaping the blonde man as he took slow steps towards the team. And only one thing could come to Luke's mind as visions of his own, bloody and gruesome death played over and over again in his head. Fuck. Luke began to shake in fear as the blonde man made his slow approach. Thinking quickly, he pressed his dagger even closer to Talia's neck. Ah! One more step and I'll slit her throat, the blonde follower of Kronos said, a small trickle of blood appearing under his blade. Talia glared up at Luke and winced slightly in pain. When I get my hands on you, Luke, I swear no punishment in all of Hades will come close to what you'll feel. She snarled up at her one-time friend. Luke looked down at her and pressed the blade a little closer. Shut up. I gave you the chance to join me, Talia, but now it's too late. So just lay there and be my little hostage for now. The blonde snarled back before his eyes went back to the encroaching menace. Kurama kept up his glare, but the rest of his body language became indifferent, loosening to a near relaxed state. So I see you still fell into darkness, the one thing I warned you of, he said with a little salt to his words, angered that his teachings went ignored. What's it going to be, Castellan? Give up and take your punishment like a man? Or slit Talia's throat and face my wrath afterwards? I highly recommend the first option. Trust me, the last guy I had to beat to a pulp in this situation both learned his lesson and lost an arm, and you seem pretty attached to yours, the blonde man asked while an aura of oppression erupted from his body, making it difficult for all of the onlookers to breathe. Percy and Annabeth unconsciously took a few steps back. Even though it wasn't directed at them, they could still feel the bloodlust rolling off of the immortal. The son of Poseidon looked to his friend and raised a slightly terrified eyebrow and pointed at the blonde. You're gonna have to explain this later, wise girl, he said with a slight shake in his voice. All Annabeth could do was nod in response as the two looked back to the standoff between the traitor and immortal. Luke tried to hide his fear by snorting at the blonde man. Come now, Kurama? What happened to not letting hatred guide you? You seem to be acting on anger right now. He mocked the immortal's words, earning a darker scowl from the man. Ah, but Luke, you see, I've raised some kids before. Of course I wasn't the best father, but I did know how to punish them when they were being brats. Now, would you like to go over my knee? Or will a timeout do? 'Cause I'm about to break out the belt, and I don't think you'd enjoy that very much. While all of this was going on, Artemis was busy looking over her fallen lieutenant. Zoe was currently laying on the ground, her head resting on her mistress's lap. This is not good. The poison's already too far into her system. Artemis began to panic. Zoe had lost consciousness after Kurama appeared, leaving her unable to fight off the effects of Landon's poison. She didn't have any other options. She needed to do something she would hate herself for. Kurama! Zoe needs help. She called to the blonde, making him halt in his advance and turn towards the goddess, seeing the downed hunter. Luke smirked at Kurama, knowing full well what he could do to escape. Oh? So what's it going to be, Kurama? Will you forsake the little hunter bitch to stop me? Or will you let me go to save a life? Come on, I'm waiting for an answer. I know little Zoe there can't wait much longer. Damn my heroic senses, Kurama grumbled before rushing over to Zoe. What's wrong with her? He asked as his hands began to glow green, running a diagnostic. She was poisoned by Landon. Artemis responded, earning a confused look from the man. Who? Wait, not important. I need some room, he said with a shake of his head. Artemis looked to her lieutenant, and back to the man she asked to save her life. After a few seconds she reluctantly left Zoe's side and let the man do his work. Luke smiled as he got off of Talia and made a break for it. Artemis watched as Luke ran off, unable to interfere without Luke directly attacking her or her hunters. But before he got too far away, a hand made of some sort of golden aura snatched the boy by his ankle, causing him to fall to the ground. What in Tartarus? He cried as he looked to the source of the hand, seeing it sprouting from Kurama's back. The man looked to the blonde traitor with an amused smirk. Please kid, you're a million years too young to trick me with this kind of shit. Now stay there while daddy thinks of a proper punishment for his bratty kid. He growled before turning his full attention to Zoe. Kurama sighed out in frustration before cutting off the medical technique. Alright, let's get this over with, he mumbled to himself. He raised his bandaged hand up to the hunter's chest, right over her heart. Taking a deep breath, he closed his eyes, channeling his power into his palm. At the center of his palm glowed a small golden sun-like circle, and soon after, a pulse of power escaped from the immortal, transferring into the hunter. Black symbols scrolled over Zoe's body, escaping from the man's hand. Kurama slowly began to lift his hand, revealing that the circle was placed on the girl's chest, and as he raised his hand, a green fluid rose with it out of the circle, following his hand's movements. The blonde immortal breathed out a sigh of relief as the last of the poison escaped Zoe's body, forming a sphere roughly the size of a baseball in Kurama's hand. The sphere quickly hardened and formed a marble-like object before Kurama crushed it in his hand, turning it into dust. And as Kurama released his grip on the now destroyed poison, Zoe surged to life with a sharp intake of breath, which continued as she regained consciousness. Zoe! Artemis called, embracing her oldest hunter. The lieutenant's eyes widened in shock from the actions of her mistress, not entirely remembering what happened. Before Zoe could ask what was going on, her savior turned back to the captive blonde with a bloodthirsty smirk. He slammed his left fist into his right palm and began cracking knuckles. Alrighty then. What should I do first? He mused as he slowly made his way over to Luke. Said blonde was nearly shaking in what appeared to be fear, and that just made Kurama's smirk wider. What, Luke? Scared of what I'm about to do? Well, here's a hint, he began before stepping a little harder, cracking the ground beneath him. It ain't gonna be pretty, he said with an absolutely savage look in his eyes. But Luke wasn't shaking in fear, if his smirk could explain for itself. How wrong you are, you old piece of shit, he growled out as his body began to shake, a light glow emanating from his skin. He began to shake even harder as the glow brightened, until his body began to tense up, nearly screaming in pain. Kurama's eyes widened as he caught a glimpse of something hovering over Luke. It was some sort of specter, a ghostly image that remained cast in shadows. A dark laugh escaped the specter as the light coming from Luke's skin exploded out, blinding all within range. H! Kurama shouted in shock, getting caught up in the light. Once his vision returned, he could barely see Luke standing near the cliffside, Talia held hostage in his arms again. Goodbye, Kurama. Better luck next time. He cackled as he fell over the edge with the daughter of Zeus. Talia screamed as she went over the edge, fully believing she was about to die, only for a hand to lash out and grab her by the ankle, stopping her fall. She slowly got a hold of her shaking breath and looked up to see Percy holding onto her ankle, Annabeth and Karama holding onto him by the waist, keeping him from going over the edge as well. Percy grit his teeth as he felt Talia's weight tug at his shoulder, trying to heave her back up. Don't worry. I got you. He gritted out as Karama and Annabeth dragged the two back up onto the mountain top. While the kids were getting their bearings after the explosion of light and the near-death experience, Karama sighed and looked over the edge of the mountain. Damn, not a single sign of him, he grumbled to himself, seeing that Luke was now nowhere to be seen. He couldn't even sense his presence anymore, and that was troubling. Nothing escaped his sensory abilities. He turned away from the cliff and moved back to where the goddess of the hunt was. So, anything else I could do to be assistance of? He asked Artemis, earning a strange look from her. Unless you can somehow teleport us to Mount Olympus, then I believe you're done here, she said to the blonde, her usual venom gone from her voice, replaced by a tiredness that seemed to convey just how much crap she was going to have to deal with soon, and the fact that she just held up the heavens for a few days. Though she did quirk an eyebrow at him when an evil smirk played onto his face. Actually, young miss, I can do exactly that, he said as he began to chuckle darkly. Before Artemis could question him, Karama turned on his heel and spread his arms. All right, kiddies. All who need to make it to Olympus in the next 0.001 seconds, grab onto my arms. He called with a grin. Percy, Talia and Annabeth shared a look before looking back at Karama. Shrugging, they stood up and latched onto his left arm. The son of Poseidon looked to Annabeth and repeated his earlier statement. You'll explain. Full detail. Later. Got it? He said with a deadpan stare. All Annabeth could do again was nod, before looking to Artemis and Zoe. Are you coming? She asked the goddess and the hunter. Artemis' eye began to twitch as she grabbed Karama's arm. I was kidding, you ass, she grumbled, making Karama laugh. Well, whatever. Here we go! He yelled before a flash of light encompassed the group, leaving the top of empty Tamalpay vacant save for the now silently cursing Atlas. Zeus, the king of gods, sighed once more as he watched the bane of Olympus do another flip in the sphere of water it was gifted, mooing happily as it swam around. He palmed his face for the umpteenth time before glaring at his elder brother, Poseidon. Again, why is the Ophiuchus in my presence and not destroyed yet? He grumbled like the thunder he ruled over. Poseidon looked up from his fishing magazine and shrugged at his king. Well, I believe Mr. Underwood had a good reason, right? The sea god said while shifting his gaze at the satyr in the room. Satyr froze on the spot and began to shake in fright. Bah, he stuttered out before bleating like a goat. Zeus just gave the satyr a deadpan stare before rolling his eyes. Brilliant, he looks like he's going to keel over any second, and he's one of the quest takers. Now Zeke, where are your manners? A voice said from behind the king's throne, making him and the other Olympians jump in surprise. Ares leapt from his throne, a sword already in hand as Hermes looked up from his phone, wondering what all of the commotion was about. Zeus spun around, trying to find the mystery man. Who dares sneak into this chamber without perm per P? He began to shout until he blanched and lost all of his anger. Karama stood with the demigods and Artemis, giving the king a wave while smirking. How you been, Sparky? The blonde immortal asked before clapping a hand onto the god's shoulder. Zeus rose a shaking hand, pointing at the blonde. Sensei! He shouted before leaping back and landing on his hands and knees, bowing to the immortal. I'm sorry! He began to beg while repeatedly bowing to the blonde. And it was at this point the other gods were just staring in shock and confusion. The goddess of the moon simply shook her head in exasperation before making her way over to her throne next to her twin brother Apollo. The blonde god was watching his father repeatedly bow in a combination of amusement and shock. He barely registered his formerly kidnapped sister was standing next to him. Oh hey Artie, any idea what's going on with Pops? He asked, earning an exasperated shrug from his sister. He just nodded and went back to being shocked and amused. This lasted until the usually quiet and docile Hestia bursted into laughter, reminding several of the gods she was still by the hearth in the grand room. Oh geez! You were right! She laughed out while she watched her youngest brother bow and plead before his former teacher. Karama turned to the brown-haired goddess and gave her the signature nice guy pose, tooth shine and all. Do I ever lie? He asked with a wide grin before turning back to the still begging Zeus. Now Zach, what was it I heard about you sleeping around and cheating on your wife? He asked with a false innocence that sent shivers down several of the gods' backs. Zeus shrieked in horror as he bowed faster and faster, fearing his former teacher's wrath. At this point Hermes was taking pictures on his phone while nudging Apollo's side. Hey, how much do you think this'll be worth in blackmail? He asked with a snicker in his voice. Demeter was idly feeding the Ophiuchus pieces of cereal as she watched the free show, wondering if the blonde liked cereal. Dionysius was sipping on his Diet Coke, silently watching his father fall from grace in probably the best way possible. "This'll teach him to take my wine from me," he grumbled before looking back to his wine magazine. "Karma's a bitch, thanks Nemesis." Hephaestus was too busy sharpening a spearhead to notice what was going on, and frankly, even if he did notice, he wouldn't even care. Aphrodite had a finger to her lips as she watched the display, wondering what she was feeling between Hestia and the new guy just before an evil smirk played onto her pretty face. "Oh, I could have so much fun with this, plus his whisker marks are pretty cute," she mused as she twirled a lock of hair between her fingers. Hearing this, Ares snarled as he watched his father make a fool of himself. "Now I just want to kill this punk even more," he grumbled, his sword constantly changing form, trying to find the perfect counter for the blonde. Poseidon was rolling on the ground laughing as he watched his perfect little brother become a fool voluntarily. All the while, Hades was chuckling as he watched his brother beg and plead. "I don't even know this guy and I already like him," he chuckled out, resting his head in his palm, leaning into his throne to further enjoy the show. While all of the other gods were having their own reactions, Hera, the queen of the gods, was probably the least noticeable. All the queen did was raise an eyebrow inquiringly, wondering why Zeus was apologizing so much. Karama walked up to the bowing Zeus and placed a hand on his shoulder. "Zook," he started to say, before Zeus decided to interrupt him. It's Zeus," since he started before a fist found its way to the top of his head, planting him flat on the ground. "Let me finish," Karama scolded, leaving a large bump on the king's head. "Hhai, sensei," Zeus called back, huge faux tears running down his face. Karama cleared his throat before he began to speak again. He took a deep breath before slamming his fist into Zeus' face, sending the king flying across the room. "You fool!" he yelled at the flying god. At this point, Percy just shot his hands into the air and turned away from the rest of the room. "Okay, this is just way too much crazy for me," he exclaimed as he started to leave, just for Annabeth and Talia to grab him by his shirt. "Wait, this is getting good," they said in unison, never taking their eyes off of the two. The son of the seas eye began to twitch as he looked at his two companions. That was just freaky. Over with the king and master, Karama kneeled in front of the bowing Zeus and clasped a hand onto his shoulder. "Now what did I teach you all those years ago?" the blonde said to his godly protege. Zeus hesitantly looked up and began to tremble. "To not go back on my W words and always be faithful to those I love," he squeaked out, trying to keep his voice under control. Karama nodded along with the words of the god before closing his eyes in a deadly smirk. "And what did you do?" All Zeus could do was gulp in fear. And then everything went black for the king of the gods. Karama sighed as he stood up, shaking his fist out after punching out a god. After he finished working out the kinks in his hand, he turned back around to the rest of the room and took a deep breath. "Hello?" he called with a grand smile. "Now you all may be wondering who, what, why, where, and how at the moment, so let me explain." He started before looking to each of the gods, a large smirk playing across his face. A long pause left the gods in suspense until Artemis got fed up with it and blurted out for him. "His name's Karama. He's an immortal that's around the age of the primordials," she yelled. A sinister smirk formed on her face when she saw the blonde man deflate in defeat. "You're no fun, you know that?" "Don't care, this isn't a time for fun anyway," the goddess of the moon responded with a nonchalant shrug. Karama's brow began to twitch in annoyance. "But the time for fun is always," he whined while flailing his arms in the air for emphasis. In the background, Apollo and Hermes whooped in agreement, but were culled into silence by a stern look from Hera. Said queen of the gods finally decided to make her presence to the immortal known by standing from her throne and approaching the blonde man. "Now, Karama, was it? I would like to ask you why my husband, and our king, seems so terrified of you at the moment, and how you came to enter our council room while it was sealed?" Hera asked, a slight bit of ice gracing her tone, showing she wasn't in the kidding mood. Karama, however, just smirked and looked back to his old student. "Well, ma'am, if you must know. Little Zappy over there broke his oaths, not just to you, but to me as well. And here I thought I raised him better. Shame really. But like all children, a little punishment will probably set him straight again," the blonde-haired immortal said before he began to chuckle darkly, taking slow steps towards the terrified king. "But," he said while stopping in mid-stride. "That must wait for later," Karama said before taking a deep breath, and turning back to the still-stunned demigods, or more specifically, Talia and Annabeth. "I must go," he said in a low voice. He walked over to where Annabeth stood, a curious expression worked onto her face. "What?" she asked as he walked to stand in front of her. "You only just left your home, aren't you supposed to end this all after I summoned you?" "Sorry, little one, but I cannot stay for very long after being summoned. It would cause more trouble than good if I stayed at this time. I also believe you dropped these, he said to the girl as he held out his hand. Annabeth looked to the man's hand and saw the same dagger he had given her all those years ago. The same dagger she had used ever since to defend herself from the hordes of monsters that haunted her every move, along with her cap of invisibility. As she took the blade from his hand, she felt a familiar palm place itself onto the top of her head. Looking up, she saw that same warm smile he wore the day she had to leave with Talia and Luke. Remember, little one throw, one prayer, and one moment, and I'll be there. And I hope you have finally learned from your dreams. Goodbye, see you later, Annabeth, he said before turning to Talia. You two have grown quite a bit since I last saw you. Keep with them, Talia. They'll need you more than ever, so be prepared to take charge, and let your thunder roar, he said before turning to the last of the demigods. Young man, I don't really know what to say to you, but I'll be good, I guess? Whatever, he said with a nonchalant shrug before turning away from the son of Poseidon, leaving the teen with a deadpan expression and a roll of the boy's eyes. Annabeth leaped forward and wrapped the immortal in a hug before looking up at the taller man. Don't go, she pleaded as she held onto him tighter. Kurama sighed before placing a hand on her head, a soft smile on his face. Remember, only one throw, Annabeth. I'm not that far away, see ya, he said before his form was covered in a flash of gold, leaving the blonde-haired girl standing alone, a sad look still on her face. I know, but you're still lonely there. Kurama reappeared in his cabin with a tired sigh. Man, I haven't stretched my legs in so long. I feel so out of shape, he whined as he slumped into his couch, brushing his bandaged hand through his hair with a tired sigh. So, now that all of the theatrics are out of the way, it is good to see you again, Zeus, he said as he turned his head over the back of the couch to see the king of the gods standing behind him, a tired smile on the god's face as he walked around and sat next to his master. Yes, it is very good to see you again, Gyuki-sensei, or should I call you Kurama-sensei now? He said with a teasing smile as he nudged the immortal in the side with his elbow. The blonde chuckled as he shook his head lightly. So how has Rihi been? He asked the god, earning a smug grin from the man. Oh? Is someone actually going to fall my mother's charms after not seeing her for 5,000 years? He asked in a teasing voice, earning a deadpan expression from the blonde. As if, he responded. You know she tried to rape me, right? I don't need that kind of crazy in my life right now, he said as he got up from the couch. You want something to drink? He asked his old student as he made his way over to the kitchen fridge. Zeus snorted as he stood up and made his way over to the fridge as well. As long as it isn't any of that old sake, I'm up for one. Order knows I need one right now, he said before grumbling as he loosened up his shoulders. After waiting on Artemis in the council room, they were getting stiff from sitting in his throne for so long. And for some reason, just being back in the sanctuary gave him the relaxed feeling he had missed for so long. Kurama sighed as he heard his students grumble. The situation's that bad? Or are you just being a pussy about things like always and blowing them out of proportion? He asked before handing the king a beer while laughing at his annoyed expression. Okay, 1, yes it is that bad, and 2, I am the god of theater. I'm supposed to make things dramatic, he argued as he popped the top off with a flick of his thumb and took a drink from the bottle. Kurama chuckled and did the same before sighing. So what's going on? He asked as they made their way back into the hearth room. Zeus shook his head with a sigh as they both sank back into the couch. It just so happens to be my bastard of a father again. No matter how much I protest, I see that he is indeed rising back again. I just don't want it to be true, he explained before mumbling the last part to himself, a sad look crossing his face as he took another large drink. Kurama nodded as he thought to himself on the situation. Troublesome. This isn't some one-off battle like the last time where you snuck in and hit him while he was down, no. This time he is gunning for you and making you play his own game, right? He asked, trying to summarize the reason for Zeus' struggles. The king nodded as he finished off his bottle with another long drink. Got it in one, but he's also using our own children against us to do so. Guess it's a bit of payback for him since we also used several of the Titan's kids to fight against him as well, he said before running a hand over his face with an exasperated grunt. I fear he has us outplayed this time. Kurama snorted at his student and took his bottle to toss in a waste bin. Well, don't forget you've got an ace up your sleeve this time, Zapster. Annabeth will use my kunai again, and the next time she does, I will end things once and for all with that brat you call a father, he declared with a winning smirk, earning a smile from his student. Zeus stood and bowed to his sensei, lowering till he was almost at a 90-degree angle. Arigato, sensei. I cannot express how grateful I am that you will assist us against father, he exclaimed loudly to his master. Kurama reached up and placed a hand on Zeus' head, ruffling the god's hair like he had done millennia ago. Don't worry, Zeus, I may have let you fight on your own first time, but now that he is coming back after not learning his lesson the first time, he will face his elders, learn from his mistakes. Zeus left later that day after a few more beers and a bit of banter between the two of them. Kurama sighed tiredly as he watched the god flash out of the sanctuary and walked back into his kitchen. He was reaching into his fridge for another beer when a voice cut him off. "Don't you think you're drinking a little much? I know you can't get drunk and all, but after 30 beers I thought you'd be done," Hestia said as she walked up behind him, her hands behind her back as she cocked her head to the side, giving him an expectant look. Kurama froze for a moment before closing the fridge without taking anything from it. "I guess you're right about that. Kinda got lost in old memories, I guess. Been a while since I last saw old Zappy, you know," he said with a shrug, keeping his gaze from meeting the goddesses. "Do you want anything to drink?" he asked after a slight pause. The goddess of the hearth thought for a moment, while placing a finger on her chin. "No, I think I'm all right," she said before looking right at him with a raised eyebrow. "But you seem to be a little off? What's wrong?" she asked, moving a little closer to him. She was standing just inside of his comfort zone, and inching a little closer as she waited for an answer. But before she could get to close, Kurama quickly shook his head and moved around her and into the living room. "Nope, I'm good here," he said quickly as he moved out of the kitchen. A little too quickly, causing Hestia's eyes to narrow slightly. She turned to look at him and tilted her head slightly. "Really? 'Cause you seem a little jumpy?" Again Kurama shook head a little too quickly as he made his way towards his door. "Nah, just still have a little adrenaline going through me after fighting that stone guy. Just gotta meditate for a bit, and I'll be fine," he said as he walked out of the cabin and towards the grand tree stump in the clearing. Hestia followed after the blonde, an interested look on her face. "Really? All right then. Oh, before I forget, what was it you were going to say before you left to fight Atlas? You never got to finish," she asked as she followed behind him. She nearly bumped into him when he stopped abruptly. She staggered back a bit before looking at him in concern. Kurama froze when he heard her ask. "Tell her." He took a shuddering breath as he tried to calm himself. He slowly turned towards the goddess and took a long breath. "Hestia, I?" "Just say it." He paused, shifting his gaze from her slightly blushing face to the ground. I. Can't thank you enough for spending so much time with this old man for these past few years, so thanks. Love you, but I just can't go through that hell again." Hestia watched Kurama as he slowly turned to face her. He took a long breath, and Hestia felt that strange feeling come over her again. It felt warm, but also like she was anxious about something. She was both happy and terrified at the same time, and for being a several millennia-year-old goddess who had never felt something even close to this before, was strange to say the least. "Hestia," Kurama began to say, before a conflicted look came across his face. A light dusting of pink came across the goddess's face as she listened to him speak. "Yes?" She saw Kurama swallow nervously before trying to continue. He said to her, making her lean a little forward slightly, intent on understanding what he was trying to say, and just what it had to do with this feeling in her chest. "What is it?" And with his next words, the feeling in her chest died in a sudden stop that she couldn't comprehend what had happened. "Can't thank you enough for spending so much time spending with this old man, so thanks." She leaned back slightly, taken aback, not able to respond as quickly as she would have liked. "Oh. Well, you're welcome, Kurama. It was my pleasure, but I need to go. I think my brother wanted to have another meeting after he was done here, so I need to go," she said before finishing quickly and flashing away in a brilliant golden light. Kurama blinked a few times before backing up to the nearest tree, resting his back against it and slowly sliding down to the ground. He ran his hands through his hair and looked up into the sky and shook his head. "I such a coward. First I abandoned my duties out of fear I miss out on raising my own children, and I'm too scared to try again. I such a fucking coward. What should I do, Kurama? What should I do?" he questioned himself, his eyes dulling as he watched the setting sun. "That's right, I'm alone again and I'm too pathetic to try and not be. Such a goddamn coward." A bright flash of light filled the empty council room of Mount Olympus. Once the light died down, Hestia could be seen, her eyes wide and starting to become red. Tears were trailing down her face as she held a bewildered expression. What in the world is going on? She wondered aloud as she tried to wipe away the tears in her eyes. She slowly made her way to the main hearth and sat in her usual spot, her tears not stopping even after wiping them. "I'm crying and I don't even know why. What in the world is wrong with me?" she asked herself as she began to furiously wipe away her tears. As she worked on her tears, she failed to notice the subtle sounds of footsteps approaching her hearth. My oh my, I never thought I'd see old Tia all heartbroken. I didn't even think it was even possible, Aphrodite said as she sauntered over to where Hestia was sitting. Hestia moved her hands away from her eyes and gave Aphrodite a confused look. What? I can't be heartbroken? I haven't fallen in love with anyone to be able to, she said in confusion, making Aphrodite snort in response. Oh please, I could literally smell the love wafting off of you earlier. I was going to say something right then and there, but then that blonde hunk showed up and wouldn't you guess that those little feelings I was getting from you increased. You, miss, I'm never going to fall in love. I'll be one of the 3 virgin goddesses, have officially fallen in love, and have gotten to experience heartbreak. I'm so happy for you, Tia. The goddess of love began to giggle as she sat down next to Hestia with a smile on her face. How do I make it stop? The elder goddess asked as she wiped a few new tears away. Aphrodite raised a delicate eyebrow while she looked at her. Stop what, Tia? She asked in an inquisitive tone, an almost invisible smirk playing on her face. The pain. How do I make my chest stop hurting? How do I stop crying? Hestia begged as she reached over to take Aphrodite's hands. The goddess of love had to hold back a chuckle as she was seeing that Hestia was playing right into where she wanted. She tilted her head to the side in a mock-thinking pose as she thought over Hestia's request. Well, it's not a very nice, but I think the best thing to do is stay away from him for a while. I mean, he seems to not like you in the same way, so why make things awkward by hanging around? Aphrodite started to say before Hestia gripped her hands tighter and shook her head furiously. No. I can't do that to him. He's been alone for so long already. Please, there has to be another way. Hestia pleaded, not wanting to let Kurama be alone again right after having someone around for so long. Aphrodite nodded and placed a finger on her chin and hummed in thought. Well, I could go there and talk to him myself. Maybe work this all out for you, she mused as Hestia's eyes lit up. Really? You'd do that for me? She asked her fellow goddess in surprise. The goddess of love nodded with a large smile. Of course, Tia, I am your friend after all, she said before standing up from her place at the hearth. She turned away with her back towards the goddess of the hearth, a wicked grin appearing on her face. I'll be right back, and all this will be sorted out, she said before she disappeared in a bright pink light. Kurama stood before his memorial stone, his eyes downcast and hollow. His breathing was slow, almost to the point that he wasn't breathing at all. His sight unwavering from the single name he had been staring at. Hinata, what do I do? His thoughts were scattered, erratic from his self-made depression. I know you'd want me to move on, but I just don't think I deserve to. I left you when you needed me most. I left you to raise our children alone. I never gave you the life or the love you wholly deserved. You were always there for me. You stood by your words. Like I once said I would, but then I betrayed that trust, that love and faith you had in me. I betrayed you, left you alone like swore I would never do. Does someone lower than trash deserve a second chance? His thoughts were cut off as he felt a presence appear behind a shaky breath. He turned towards the new arrival. Well, what brings you to M? He began to say in a false chipper mood before he stopped himself. Aphrodite stood before him in all of her glory. He's so struck by my beauty he can't even talk. Ah, that's so cute, she thought to herself as she closed her eyes and smiled at him, completely missing the darkening features of the blonde. Well, hello there, handsome. Could you be a dear and get me something to drink? She asked the blonde, laying her charm speak on as thick as she could without turning his brain into mush with her power. After a moment of silence, she opened her eyes to see what he was doing. Well, she began before a hand slammed into her throat, bringing her across the sanctuary and into the side of the cabin. The goddess of love choked as she clawed at the hand that held her a clear foot from the ground. She looked into the face of her attacker and paled instantly. Kurama looked at his new guest in utter shock. There stood a woman that looked almost exactly like his long-ago deceased wife. From her dark indigo hair to her large lilac eyes. The only difference he could see was that she had a slightly darker skin tone, and her face was more angular and less rounded. The appearance shocked him. The appearance surprised him. But most of all, the appearance infuriated him. Well, hello there, handsome. Could you be a dear and get me something to drink? The thing asked him in such a condescendingly sweet tone that it made Kurama want to gag. After hearing his wife's voice perverted and tainted into the tone that whoever this woman was using made him see red. Kurama's eyes turned red and became slit like a feral cat's. He was no longer in a mourning and self-depressed mood. No. The Jinchuriki of all 9 of once great-tailed beasts was awoken. And he was enraged. Before the witch could utter another word, he rushed forwards and pinned her to the side of his cabin by her throat. He snarled at her, letting her see his eyes clearly. his killing intent and chakra washing over the sanctuary in such a heavy miasma that it caused the sky and surroundings to turn red. "Don't you dare speak in that voice, you witch!" he snarled in utter contempt. "You dare walk into my sanctuary and take her form, pervert her beauty with your twisted illusions, force her voice to sound as if she were no better than a pampered whore. You will leave here, goddess, and you will tell the rest of your ilk that they are no longer welcome within my sanctuary. Only Zeus may return here, and if I ever see your vile form in my presence again, I will eviscerate you over and over again before you can fade from this world. You will never return, or you will die, puny goddess. Now leave!" Kurama roared in his rage, before forcefully ejecting the goddess from his sanctuary. His breathing was sporadic as he tried to rein in his anger. After a few minutes, he finally calmed his breathing down enough, letting his anger pass before he remembered what he had just done. With a deep sigh, he looked back to his memorial stone. "I am worth nothing lower than trash." Percy's eyes twitched as he started to wake up. The first thing he noticed was the searing pain running through his body. The last thing he remembered was being caught in the middle of an erupting volcano, and now he was wherever he was. He tried to move but winced harshly from a sudden jolt of pain. It felt like every inch of his skin was burnt, and was being poked by something sharp. However, that sharp feeling was mostly in his leg. Weird. He slowly began to open his eyes with a groan. Turning his head slightly to the side, he started to take in his surroundings. "Okay, how did I get in a cave?" he thought to himself as his vision began to clear up. And lo and behold, he was in a cave. Though, it wasn't as dark or dank as he thought one would be. In fact, there was a lit lantern on the other side, along with what seemed to be a rolled-out bed. His observation was cut short when he felt another sharp sting in his leg. Flinching slightly, he looked to his leg and noticed the glint of steel in the flickering lantern light. The tip of the blade was poking him in the leg lightly, shaking slightly. He let his view flow up the single-edged blade up to the wielder, and his eyes widened at what he saw. Red. A shadow was cast over the wielder of the sword, a single red eye peering down on him. This eye, however, had a strange pattern to it, a little like a cross between a star and an atom. As he looked at the eye, it blinked a few times before whoever it was spoke up. "Oh! Awake! Awake is good. But you're hurt, I fix," the person said, a deep, but timid voice said to him. The man put his sword down next to Percy and kneeled a little closer. Now in the light, Percy could see the man's face. He seemed to be a man in his early 20s. Long black hair covered his left eye from view, but his left eye was plagued by heavy bags, indicating the man hadn't slept in a very long time. He had fair and pale skin, but seemed to be a little too thin to be healthy. He wore a black cloak and a dark purple shirt that seemed way overdue for a wash, and what seemed to be a single sleeve rolled up to about the base of the elbow, indicating that he had lost his left arm some time ago. Before Percy could ask what was going on, a green glow formed around the man's single hand and slowly washed over Percy's body. What the Percy breathed out as he instantly felt the pain subside from his body, leaving only a warm feeling of content behind. I heal you up," the man muttered in his sporadic way of speech. After a few minutes, the man stopped whatever healing magic he was using and sighed. "Heal a lot. But not enough. Still hurt, but get better after a while," he sputtered out before jumping to his feet and walking aimlessly away. Percy slowly got to his feet, amazed that he only felt a dull throb in his back as he moved. Hey. Wait!" he called after the man, only to be ignored as the man continued on his way through the cave. After Percy lost sight of the man, he moved over to where the lantern was and took it into his hands. "Okay, not good," he said as he made his way after the man, pulling out Riptide for good measure. "Hello?" he called after a few minutes of walking through the cave. "Hey! Dude! You there?" he continued to call before he was forced to stop. "Whoa!" he exclaimed as he stopped before a great drop. He looked up and saw only darkness ahead of him, the light of his lantern unable to light up the cavern he was in. After looking around, he noticed a staircase leading down the sheer drop into the chasm ahead. "Now I know this a terrible idea, but hey, what could go wrong?" he said to himself as he made his way down the chasm. "By the gods! How long of a drop is this?" he said as he continued to descend the stairs. It had been nearly an hour since he started going down, and he had yet to reach the bottom. It wasn't until he started to wind did he notice he was on the last stair. "Oh," he said to himself before he stepped off of the stairs and onto solid ground. "Great, it's still as dark as Hades down here," he grumbled to himself as he looked around the walls near the stairs. "Huh! What's that?" he said as he noticed a small piece of paper stuck to a pedestal near the stairs. Now, one could never say Percy wasn't a curious person. Hell, Sometimes his curiosity got him into some of his worst situations and his absolute crap luck. But this wasn't one of those times. As soon as his hand made contact with the paper, a pulse of power escaped from the pedestal, causing a reaction that made random blue glowing lights form in the air, giving light to the massive cave. What was the only word Percy could say as he dropped the lantern in his hand from shock. Before him stood a massive gate, its doors open and waiting. And on top of it were letters he couldn't recognize at all. He was lost at what he was looking at, until a voice called out from behind him. "Welcome to the ruins of Kanahigakure no Sato, the village hidden in the leaves." "Whoa! Holy son of A!" Percy shouted as he swung around to where the voice came from, to see the strange man who healed him flinch away from his shouting. "No yelling, no yelling. Echo makes a bad," the man said as he held his ears in pain. As he finished warning Percy about the echo, the cave rumbled and shook for a moment before stopping. "What just happened?" Percy mumbled as he steadied his staggered feet. The man in front of him took his hands from his ears and started to dart his head around as if he was watching for something. "No yell. Sanctuary weak," the man muttered as he nursed his aching ears. "Keep quiet, no yell. Follow me please," he continued to say after his ears stopped ringing, waving his hand out for Percy to follow. The son of Poseidon looked at the man for a minute, a questioning look in his eyes. Who was this guy? After a moment, the man stopped walking and looked back at Percy's unmoving form. "Well? Come on, I give a tour," he said to him while continuing to wave for him to follow. Percy sighed as he shook his head. As he began to follow the man, he could only think of one thing. This guy's freaking nuts. "So what exactly is this place?" Percy asked after nearly an hour of aimless wandering through the ruined city. He had to admit, the place was both beautiful and creepy at the same time. Between the soft blue lights and some of the high-up viewpoints, he could see that cave wasn't just enormous, but the city itself was beautiful. He knew one thing for sure: if Annabeth ever came here, she would have a field day just looking at the architecture of some of the buildings. But with all that said, the place was still horrifyingly quiet. Between the darkness and the absolute quiet, the place was no better than a ghost town, reminding the boy of his time in the underworld. "Hopefully there aren't any three-headed dogs down here." The man stopped abruptly, nearly causing Percy to run into his back as he contemplated his question. Cocking his head to the side, the man thought as he hummed aloud. "Konoha is Konoha. It is home. Great city, ancient city. Strongest ninja village." He tried to explain as best he could, but all he did was confuse the poor boy even more. Percy held up his hands and shook his head. Whoa, 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 did you say ninja village? Like Japanese guys that wear pajamas and run around at night? He asked in utter confusion. And what do you mean by great city, ancient city? His guide through this ghost town simply ran his single hand through his hair and grumbled to himself about idiots and daubs. Whatever that meant. Old city, before current era. Made before land was split up a Pangaea? It around on Pangaea. Percy narrowed his eyes at the man. What's Pangaea? The dark-haired man groaned in annoyance as he started to walk away. Dumb daubs, every one of them. You know part of a tour is talking, right? You have anything cool to say about any of these buildings? Percy asked after another silent hour of walking. Honestly, if this guy was trying to show him around, he could at least tell him what he was looking at. His guide cut his eyes, or at least Percy guessed at eyes. He had caught glimpses of some purple glow coming from where his hair covered his left eye, so he guessed he had two eyes. With a sigh, the man who was leading Percy around turned and pointed ahead of him. The building he was pointing at was a 3-story building that was fenced in with what looked like a petrified tree with a swing barely hanging by rotting rope. Academy learned to kill and defend country when child, the dark-haired man said in his broken style of speech. Percy turned to him with raised eyebrows. You mean like child soldiers? That just ain't right, man, he said in response with a slight shake of his head. Of course, when he thought about it, all of the half-bloods were child soldiers, trained from a young age to fight monsters and go on quests for the gods. But that was for a different reason than serving your country. They were learning to fight so that they could survive in the world, not just be random bodies on the battlefield. The man just shrugged and walked on. Different time needed soldiers, everyone died young. He reasoned as he continued down the main street of the ruined city. After a while, Percy was led to a large tower-like structure. On it was a symbol that Percy could understand, much like most of the writing that's strewn around the city. What's that? He asked as he pointed towards the tower, earning a glance from his guide. Hokage Tower, he said in a quiet tone, almost trying to avoid the tower as much as possible. This, however, the son of Poseidon did not pick up on. Hokage? What's that? he asked in a genuinely curious tone. The word just sounded strange to him, like there was some sort of deep meaning to it. He watched the man in front of him as his shoulders tensed, but after a moment, he loosened his shoulders only to blur into motion. The dark-haired man quickly spun on the spot towards the tower and held a hand up to his mount. Fire release, Phoenix Flame Jutsu, he exclaimed before several jets of flame erupted from the man's mouth, up towards the tower. Percy hit the ground with a startled shout, avoiding the flames on instinct. As the fireballs flew over him, he followed their paths and his jaw dropped in shock. The jets of bright flame flew over the tower and into the air, up towards the wall of the cave they were in, and along the wall was something he was sure Annabeth would spaz over for a long time if she ever got to see it. There were 10 faces along the wall, large carvings of stone that showed the likeness of people of some grand importance. Hokages, the man said, breaking Percy from his shocked state. The son of Poseidon looked towards the man with a gobsmacked expression. Huh! Was his intelligent response, causing the man to sigh and hold the bridge of his nose. He pointed towards the monument and looked at Percy in the eyes. Hokages, leaders of village and most powerful shinobi, he said as his voice began to trail off. Percy noticed that his eye was turned away from him and back up to the mountain. Percy followed his gaze up towards the mountain and noticed a single face that he was staring at. It was a carving of a female. It was the 8th one to be made, and it sort of looked like the man he was being guided by. Looking back to the man, Percy raised an eyebrow. Ancestor or something? He asked the man, earning a half-hearted glare from him. Daughter, he responded, earning a shocked look from Percy. But you don't look all that much older than me. At least not old enough to have a kid, he stated in shock. The man in front of him just shook his head and started to walk away. Immortal, he said over his shoulder, getting an understanding "oh" from Percy. As he started to follow after the man, he took one last look at the monument before stopping. Wait a minute, he said, mostly to himself, but loud enough for his guide to hear him. The dark-haired man turned back towards him with a confused expression. I know that guy, he said as he pointed towards the face next to the guide's daughter. Yeah. I met him last year. I think Annabeth said his name was Aku Karama. Yeah. Karama. He helped us save Artemis last year. While Percy was remembering the man's name, his guide looked him with wide eyes. And then he smirked. That smirk gave rise to a small chuckle, which then began to evolve into a full-blown laugh, making Percy back away from the man in confusion. As the dark-haired man began to calm down, Percy raised a hand in questioning. He began before another round of laughter cut him off. Dobe. Dobe is bwahaha. The man tried to say as he nearly fell to the floor. The son of Poseidon's eyebrow began to twitch, and he was about to yell at the man in front of him, but was suddenly stopped when the man came to an abrupt halt, his once mirth-filled expression becoming one of complete stone and seriousness. If Dobe showed up then nearly end of era. You, he said as he pointed towards Percy. You strong? It wasn't a statement, it was a question. You strong enough to win? Strong enough to protect? He asked in his broken pattern of speech, his expression one of complete seriousness. Percy stared at the man for a moment, before he felt something snap in him. Okay, first off, I have no idea of what is going on here, but what I need to know is how to get out of here. Annabeth needs my help, the camp needs my help. I need to return to Camp Half-Blood as soon as possible. I need you to show me how to get out of here. He yelled at the crazed man, earning a raised eyebrow from him. And if I don't let you leave? The man asked, his broken way of speech disappearing as a feeling of dread and malice filled the cave. Percy began to shake slightly from the pressure the man was exuding, but he was able to steel his nerves enough to uncap his hidden blade and level the point towards the man. Oh look, I don't want to hurt you, but if why you don't tell me how to get out of here, I will have to force you. He stuttered out, his sword arm shaking slightly. The man before him looked with an appraising gaze for a moment before a confident smirk appeared on his face. Try it, the man said before he unsheathed his single-edged blade from the scabbard on his hip. And see if you are truly strong. He roared before he dashed forward, faster than anyone Percy had ever seen before. It was by some wicked twist of fate that he was actually able to raise his blade quick enough to block the faster man's blade. The man raised an impressed eyebrow and retracted his blade and thrust it forward in a quick lunge. Again, Percy was able to just barely keep up with the man's speed and was able to deflect the blade enough that it didn't go through his head. Just enough for it to only leave a small cut on his left cheek under his eye. The brown-haired boy stumbled back a few steps and cursed as his hand unconsciously went up to his cheek. That was a mistake, a cold and menacing voice whispered into his ear from behind him, and before he could turn around, cold steel drove itself through his chest, blood pouring out of his body as he reeled in pain. Percy took a shaky look down to see the sword sticking out of his chest, but when there was no sword, no wound, no pain, he gasped in shock. Looking forward, he saw the dark-haired man standing before him, his blade still sheathed away. "Welcome to the Tsukuyumi. You will fight me for 3 days and 3 nights, and then you will be stronger than you could possibly imagine, and then you will be allowed to leave." "The Tsuku what?" Percy said in exasperated confusion, earning a deadpan stare from the man before him. "You're quite stupid, no?" the red-eyed man said with his ever-stoic tone of voice, making Percy's eye twitch. "Hey! Who you callin' Stu WH?" The son of the sea began to rant, just before he brought up his sword to yet again barely block an overhead swing from the black-clad man before him. How is he so dashed? The demigod began to think before the black-clad man spoke. "Fast?" he said, more as a statement than a question, making Percy's eyes widened. He just said X again. He was interrupted from his thoughts, as he barely ducked in time to dodge a thrust and block yet another strike. "Exactly what you were thinking?" the man said again, gaining a cocky smirk. "I can see the future. Do you want to know what I see?" he explained, making Percy grow pale as he was pushed off and away from the man with so much strength it sent him sliding across the ground for about 10 meters. As the teen was slowly getting up, coughing slightly from his harsh impact with the ground, he heard a faint whisper in his ear. Your death was all he heard before a sharp pain ran through his chest, just like before. "Oh!" Percy screamed in pain, but again like before, it all stopped as he was now standing, back where they started, no blood, no pain, and no stab wound. "Why?" was all Percy could do before the man was on him again in a blur of speed. The sound of clashing metal could be heard throughout the darkness of the cave. The ruins of Konoha, usually silent in its hollow crypt, alive with the sounds of combat and shrill girly screams. Percy tried his best to avoid and deflect as many of the man's attacks as he could, but in the end he'd always end up with a sword driving through his chest. This so happened to occur again as he tried to sidestep a particular thrust that ended up being a feint. "Damn it!" the teen roared in frustration as he appeared back where he started, yet again facing the man before him. "That makes 112 deaths in the past 13 hours, 12 minutes, and 8 seconds, and you avoided death about 7 times in the last bout. You're improving," the immortal said to the boy, earning a raised eyebrow from the teen. Really, he began to question before his instincts yelled at him to raise his sword, causing him to deflect a quick thrust from the man before him. "Don't get distracted," he warned before he began to press his attack on the boy. "Oh geez!" the boy screamed as he narrowly avoided a sidelong swipe from the man, only to have the air knocked out of him by a brutal kick from the man. Skidding across the ground, Percy quickly recovered as fast as he could, curling his body up into a backward somersault and planting himself back on his feet. Raising his sword back up, Percy kept his eyes solidly on the man in front of him, panting lightly from the pain in his stomach with his sword arm trembling slightly, but nevertheless, his face had determination written all over it. This caused the man to pause and smirk at the boy. "You're a lot like how he used to be," he cryptically said before dashing at the boy again with a renewed vigor. Percy cursed as he was left confused by the man's words, while also trying to survive as long as possible. Ducking under yet another horizontal slash, Percy decided to begin his counterattack with a precise thrust towards the man's stomach while he was still recovering from his missed slash. His efforts were cut short as the man simply twisted out of the way, bringing the hilt of his sword across the demigod's cheek, sending him reeling through the air and into a wall with enough force to crack it. The son of the sea slowly slid down the wall with an obviously pained groan. As his feet touched the ground, he struggled to remain standing, using Riptide as a makeshift crutch for a moment to get his balance. Panting softly, he looked at the man in the eye before leveling his blade to continue his fight. The red-eyed man smirked as he saw that the determination and will to fight burning in the boy's eyes increased in this dire state. Nodding, he held his sword in a reverse grip and crouched low, the muscles in his legs tensing, in preparation to pounce. "Yes, just like him." "Ha ha ha, so how you gonna explain what this is?" Percy asked in between breaths as he watched the man in front of him observe him with a critical eye. "It has been 15 hours and you've only died a total of 155 times, that's only 43 times in the last 2 hours. You even evaded death 20 times. I guess you've earned the right to know," the man said before sheathing his blade and sitting on the ground. Percy watched the man with a critical eye, deciding to not drop his guard against him, knowing if he did, he would probably die again. Seeing the boy remain standing and ready for battle caused the man to smirk. "Good, never drop your guard, especially against an opponent who is clearly more powerful than you," he said before taking a deep breath and breathing out slowly. You, child, are in my illusionary world known as the Tsukuyumi. Here, I control everything, time, space, even what you perceive as reality. But to make all of this worth anything, I made it so that within this illusion, I kept everything exactly like it was in reality. I am no stronger than I really am, you are not any weaker than normal. I am not changing the space around you, and I am not slowing you down at all. Within this illusion, I can help you learn how to use that razor blade you have there extremely quickly without any repercussions. And in my many millennia of time, I have learned that in a life or death situation, people tend to learn more quickly than normal. So, for the next 57 hours I will try to kill you as many times as possible. All you have to do is survive, and you will instantly see improvement. Once these 3 days and nights are over, we will be back where I cast the illusion on you only seconds after I cast it, understand? The black-clad man explained before asking Percy if he got all of it, due to the confused look on the brown-haired boy's face. Not a single word, Percy said with a deadpan expression as he tried to wrap his head around what he had just heard. His response caused the man to sigh in exasperation with an annoyed eye roll. Whatever, prepared to try and not die, he said before he blurred out of his sitting position and resumed his torture training. Good, he's beginning to learn my style, the red-eyed man thought as he continued to clash with the demigod before him. In less than a day, no less impressive. Percy was panting hard as he deflected the 20th attempt on his life. He was covered in minor scratches and small bruises, and he felt like his arms were being put through a meat grinder, but he was also completely alert, and feeling more in tune with his body than ever. Dodge, duck, parry, jump, back, roll, block, parry, thrust, he mentally commanded himself before he finally noticed an opening to take advantage of. Bringing Riptide up to the front of his body, he lunged out in a quick thrust before cursing himself for being too quick to take advantage of an opening. Too slow, the man roared as he slapped the blade away from him with the pommel of his blade, effectively catching Percy with a horizontal slash to the chest, causing the whole scenario to restart at his death. Fucking damn it! He cursed as he looked at the man in front of him in pure frustration. How long was that one? The red-eyed man chuckled before shaking his head. You avoided death 35 times. It's been 23 hours since we started too. Impressive amount of work done in a single day. But oh well, that makes death number 257, he said with a sinister smirk. Let's make that number go up, shall we? He said before once again blurring into motion. Fuck. Ha ha ha, Percy stood across from the red-eyed man. His sword was leveled in a defensive stance, his feet were wide to keep a strong base. We've been going at this for 40-something hours. And somehow I don't feel all that tired. Must be a part of the illusion, the boy thought to himself as he waited for his opponent to make the first move. Damn it, pay attention, he internally screamed as he narrowly avoided a slash to his face. The dark-haired man gave an amused smirk as he flowed effortlessly into his next attack. Your only thoughts should be on the battle, kid. Outside thoughts are what get people killed. He chastised as he flowed through a countless number of thrusts, moving so fast that the human eye had no way of following. All of which, Percy seemed to avoid with a strained ease. By either dodging, deflecting, or narrowly avoiding, he made it possible for himself to get out of the way of death yet again. Yeah, but they also let you keep your mind open and relaxed. Too much tension will make you miss out on the small things, like the fact you're pushing me towards a wall, Percy retorted as he deflected another thrust with the flat of his blade, flowing into an overhead slash that was avoided by the man. The red-eyed man spun around the attack, covering the location of his blade with his long cloak. In mid-spin, he brought up his left leg for a spinning heel kick, which forced Percy to duck out of the way, into the man's follow-up slash from his hidden sword. Percy was barely able to get his sword up in time to stop his immediate death, but it also didn't stop his enemy's sword from slicing open his shoulder. TSK! He hissed in pain as he rolled out of the way from a dangerous axe kick that caused a small crater to form underneath it. Continuing with a second roll and a backwards handspring, Percy distanced himself from his opponent, and managed to get away from the wall he was being pressured towards. Instead, he was being forced towards a different wall, one that was only chest height, but still able to pin him in a corner. Shit, he cursed as he saw the wall behind him, and he cursed again for taking his eyes off his opponent. Over here, kid, the man said before sending a powerful kick towards the demigod, clashing with the broad side of the boy's sword, and sending him through the air and over the wall. Shit! Percy screamed as he fell further than he thought he would. Apparently, the wall was to block a small cliff, leading to a small pond. Wait, he could use that. A loud splash signified that the son of the sea made it into his home turf. While Percy sat in the chest-high water, he smirked viciously as he began to feel rejuvenated and empowered, his godly blood crying out for a little bit of revenge for the humiliation he was going through. He was a warrior. He was a demigod. He was the son of the sea god, son of the earth shaker. He was Percy Jackson, and it was time for his counterattack. Time for a little payback. The first thing Percy did as he reopened his eyes was gasp in shock and terror. He had just fallen into the water and gained his godly boost in strength when he decided to give the man before him a taste of his own medicine. He willed the water to form a cyclone around him, forming at his waist and raising him into the air. As soon as he cleared the wall, he stared down at the man and willed the water flowing around him to strike out at his foe. But that all ended when he saw the man completely disappear in a burst of speed so fast that even with the aid from his boosted abilities he couldn't keep up. And then he heard man whisper in his ear, "Don't get cocky, you aren't the only one who has a few tricks up their sleeves." And that was when he felt a sharp pinch in his neck, and suddenly he was looking at his own body from a place somewhere on the ground. This lead up to the present with Percy looking at the man before him in absolute terror. What the hell are you?" he breathed out as he began to shake. For the first time, he felt actual fear as the man stared him down, exerting his presence onto the boy. Percy couldn't breathe, and was nearly knocked to his knees by the man's look alone. "This is even worse than when Hades was trying to kill me. What in the living Tartarus is he?" He mentally screamed at himself as he began to back away slowly. The black-haired man watched the boy's reaction to his light amount of killer intent with a stridinating eye. And then he noticed the boy's feet begin to inch backwards, causing him to outright scowl. "Oh?" he began. "So, now that you know you aren't the big dog on campus, you're trying to puss out and run on me? What happened to that fire? That determination? You're nothing like him, you are nothing." The man's temper began to rise alongside the demigod's fear. "I had hoped that you would have the balls to stand up in the face of adversity. I guess now, I see the real you. A scared little boy with too many responsibilities thrust upon him, Faye. You aren't worth my time. Begone from here." He finished with a wave of his hand, releasing the Tsukuyami illusion prematurely. Percy was frozen at the spot. He didn't even notice the illusion's dispelling as he watched the black-clad man walk away from him. His back turned and all signs of guard down. And then Percy's eyes widened. "Chance," he mentally roared out as he brandished Riptide and lunged as fast as he could towards the man. Bringing his sword back close to his chest, he coiled his muscles and readied himself for a series of quick thrusts. But right before he attacked, his instincts roared at him to defend. And so he did, barely registering he stopped a fatal blow from striking his neck. "Wah!" was his intelligent response before his body was sent flying through the air from the impact. The demigod slid across the ground and only stopped when he crashed headfirst into a wall of a market building. As he groggily stood up, Riptide still firmly in his grasp, he heard the man's chuckles.